It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Hello and welcome into another edition of One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Jack Roche. Michael Leegan will join us a little later to talk baseball and have our headlines. We're going to be with you from 11 to 2 a.m. on 90.7 FM, Facebook Live, and then also YouTube. And Jack, it's great to be with you tonight as we're fully into summer, the Midsummer Classic, gone, done. And coming out of the All-Star break, baseball's here. First series for it. The Mets and Yankees have a ton to talk about with them. NBA Finals is in full swing. And also a lot of rumors are now swirling around the association as well. But Jack, I got to ask you first, how are you doing?
Well, listen, I don't think there's a better time to be a baseball fan. We're coming out of the All-Star break. I think this is the point of the season where, certain teams separate themselves from the rest of the pack. And man, I'm really excited for some playoff baseball. I know that's a little while away, but it's just a good time to be a baseball fan.
Yeah, you talk about that, the trade deadline. I think this is kind of the point where everyone figures out where they are, buyers, sellers, stand pat. And I think for this Mets and Yankees team, I think you're going to go into a lot of decisions being made for both of these teams. Mets, I think everyone thinks they're going to be buyers with the new ownership, Steve Cohen. I really hope they're buyers as a fan. And then the Yankees kind of in a different situation, only, 2 games over 500. I think that conversation is really fascinating to talk about if they should be buyers or sellers, especially, where they are in this win now mode. And to me, that's really interesting. We're going to jump into that in our first segment to just talk about these Mets and Yankees going into the second half, as you wouldn't expected the Yankees to, be only 2 games over 500, 4th place in the AL East. And with the Mets, all the injuries, all of the just ups and downs of the season, they sit 6 games over 500, first in the NL East, but they got their own problems of their own. And I think New York baseball this year has just been so fascinating to see really the ups and downs of these two teams.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people are expecting the Mets to make some moves, but I think some hold the opinion that a lot of those guys that they need to become that baseball team we all expect are already on the roster. So, a team like the Yankees, they've got a lot of holes to plug, but we'll see how active both of these teams will be at that deadline.
Yeah, you talk about the Mets that, maybe they're the players that they need to get going are already in the clubhouse. You talk about guys like McNeil, Conforto, it's Dom Smith, and Pete Alonso wins the home run derby, but I think still getting him going. I mean, none of these guys have carried the team for even a week's time, and that's something that the Mets are definitely going to have to look into. You have Lindor, who may be hurt. We don't know the situation of him. He got hurt in Friday's game, came out of the game with, I think, a right side injury. So we'll see what that situation is. And I think everyone with the Mets, they're calling Chris Bryant's name or, some other big star. And it's going to be interesting because I do think this lineup, you just look at it from top to bottom, it's pretty deep. These guys just got to really start hitting. And the Yankees, I think that they're teetering on if they should buy or sell. And to me, it's just obviously with the COVID situation, it came at the worst time for the Yankees as they come into this pivotal stretch with the Red Sox and just a ton of division games after that. To me, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they can overcome this. And if you lose a lot of games, I think that changes a lot. I think if you maybe win a few games and keep your head above water during the stretch, you'll feel completely different, maybe going, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, when, you're looking to make trades.
I mean, are we at a point where the Yankees are like, can we still expect them to have a shot at winning the AL East?
No, I don't think so. I think that you look, they're 0-7 against the Red Sox. Like, that's something like you can't expect to win a division when you're division rivals. I think we all know just that bitter rivalry, and the Red Sox have owned it, like just completely owned it and they haven't done much better against the Rays either. Or, the division record's not there. And if you want to go win a division, you got to play well against your division. I don't think this team has an AL East title in their sights. Wild card will be a different story, and I think that's kind of how they could sneak in, especially if Garrett Cole's pitching well. You may feel good about that game, but I don't know. That AL East to me is it's too hard.
I just feel like there are so many stretches or points that you can look at where you're like, oh, they're rounding the corner. You take 2 out of 3 against Houston, and then that game happens and you blow that lead. And that's like a heart-wrenching loss. I feel like they've been on the brink of rounding the corner so many times, and
they fell flat.
Here we are.
Here we are. That's definitely a perfect summary of it. And then me and you, Jack, will sit down with Matt Mikulski, who just got selected in the MLB draft by the San Francisco Giants, and Fordham Baseball alum, and obviously just a dominant 2021 campaign, unanimous All-American, A-10 pitcher of the year. You can go on and on and on. And I thought he had a ton of interesting things to say. And, I was fortunate enough to see him in person last year. And when you see him just mow down guy after guy, and I think he had like 16 or 17 strikeouts in the game I called against him, you see the talent just jumps off the screen. And he's also a great guy, and it was great to sit down and talk with him.
Yeah, San Francisco got a stud.
Yes, they definitely did. I know Dodgers fans in a few years will be a little nervous to see Mikulski toe the rubber. My brother's a big Padres fan. I was like, you got to watch out for this guy because he's going to be giving you some headaches for years to come. But then Mike will join us for some headlines, some NBA headlines that I think are going to be very interesting with the Dame Lillard situation. And with Dame Lillard, I feel like over the last year, a lot of people then bring up the Knicks and if they will go after them, if they won't. Then you bring in some other guys. Colin Sexton's another guy that the Knicks have kind of, been interested in, or at least the rumors are swirling around him. But I think Lillard specifically just how big of a star he is. But then he comes out in a press conference, said that he hasn't, made a trade request yet, but he hasn't fully committed to the Trailblazers as well. It's just such an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and we're in the middle of the NBA Finals, and I feel like the biggest NBA headline is about Damian Lillard, So it's fun monitoring that situation. I'm really curious to see where he ends up. I really can't imagine him wearing a different jersey.
Yeah, he's talked about in the past how he wants to stay with the Trailblazers, but at a certain point, I think it talks about winning a title and just how much that means to a lot of just NBA legacy people that talk about it. Maybe something, I don't know, it'll be interesting. But then you look at the Knicks, is that the spot he can do it in? He's had supposedly other teams as well on his list, but it's all just, I think, rumors at this point. It's always fun to talk about. And I think you said it was the biggest story in basketball. It's definitely the biggest story in New York for basketball for sure. Then we'll talk about Team USA and JaVale McGee joining the team. So that's definitely going to be a fun headline. And then also the play-in tournament will come back for next year, which I think is definitely interesting. Then we'll sit down with writer and editor Matt Caputo. We talked Islanders, NBA Finals, and it was definitely great to talk with him. He had some really cool stories that I think are definitely really unique, and I definitely think everyone will enjoy them.
Yeah, it was great to sit down and talk to him. I've got some connections to the Rockaway area, so it was definitely nice hearing from someone who had somewhat of a connection.
Yeah, for sure. And then Michael join us back for some headlines with some NFL headlines, and definitely a lot of interesting things. The Brady story that he tore his MCL actually with the Patriots and didn't get a surgery. And then he played it the whole year with the Bucs, and it got worse and worse supposedly. And for me, obviously as a Saints fan, playing Brady, losing to him in the playoffs, like that's something that, again, I'm kind of over it at this point. Like I've made peace at that loss. Some losses I haven't made peace with, like the no call and the Minneapolis Miracle. But this one, again, I think the Bucs outplayed the Saints. But this story, I don't like the types of storylines where we look back on like this breaking news, but it happened a few months ago, like the Brady news. Or the one I really don't like is that it came out like right before the season that Brady could have went to the Saints if Breeze retired back last season. I'm just like, you tell us this now, but you didn't tell us it during the start of the year. Like it's some of that like before training camp, offseason stuff that it's like we really got nothing to talk about and we got to bring up something.
Andrew, all I'll say is that Brady beat you guys on one leg, and if you were really over it, you wouldn't have to say that you were over it.
We'll definitely get into it. We'll talk also about Marcus Maye and his franchise tag situation. That will be really fun. And also about the NFL vaccines race. There was just a report that came out. Definitely we'll get into all of that. Then we'll jump into the NBA Finals, which to me has been a very interesting really series because it's just two new teams. And I do like to see two new teams. It's not the Warriors. It's not Steph Curry. It's not LeBron James, which to me is just, it's nice to have some new storylines, talk about some new things. And it's not, oh, is LeBron going to overtake Jordan? Like I feel like everyone talks about every year when LeBron's in it, or if it's something about Steph and, the super team that the Warriors have for a few years. It's just nice to have new stars, new storylines. And it's really been a great series back and forth.
Yeah, I think for so long, NBA fans have kind of been crying out for some parity. And this is it. It's Phoenix versus Milwaukee. Who would have expected that going into, this NBA season? Yeah,
for sure. And this NBA playoffs, I think, has been really fun. A lot of definitely twists and turns to this playoff season. And then we'll finish off the show. Mike will rejoin us and we'll talk all things MLB second half, bowl predictions, trade deadline stuff. It will definitely be really fun. And I always love talking about speculating about this stuff. And I think this is the perfect time because you're about 2 weeks away from the trade deadline. And that's always fun to see who your team's going to get. I know, Jack, as a Red Sox fan, you're definitely probably looking into about who they can get and add to an already really good team. And it's just it's always really fun to speculate about that stuff. And, who's going to maybe turn it around in the second half, final standings predictions. I always love getting some bold predictions at the end of the show.
Yeah, it's my favorite time. I said at the beginning, it's my favorite time to be a baseball fan. So, it'd be nice to kind of speculate on what's to come.
For sure. But I think that'll wrap up our rundown, as this should definitely be a very, very fun show. Next, we'll be joined by Michael Leegan to talk some Mets and Yankees. Definitely cannot wait. But first, we are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Back here on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Jack Roche and Michael Leegan. And guys, let's get into some Mets-Yankees talk as we're now at the halfway point of the season. And for both these teams, a lot of ups and downs. I do want to start off with this Mets team coming in first place in the NL East. They've been in the first place for quite some time now, which I think this is the longest time since 2007 that they've been in first place for, a single span of time, which I know Mets fans, it's definitely hitting a bad note from that 2017. But look, they've been in first place for a while. I think everyone goes to, though, the amount of games that they're ahead. And, when you look at the other teams in the division, how much the Braves have struggled, the Phillies have struggled, being only 3 games up is definitely, I feel like you could have definitely had chances to expand that lead coming out of the All-Star break. You play Pittsburgh before the All-Star break, you play Pittsburgh, and you really can't take full advantage of it. You split before the break. You lose the first game after the break. I mean, obviously, we'll see what happens in the last 2 games of the series and going forward. But this team, they got healthy. Kind of Friday was their first team where they were just fully healthy. Everyone from opening day. And then you have Lindor go down with, some right side tightness, and we'll see what happens with that. But I think with the Mets, when they were 6-7 games over, 8 games over, when they had the bench mob and the replaced Mets, I think everyone was so happy that they were 6-7 games over with not that many guys in the lineup. It was really the regular was only Lindor and Pete Alonso. And then, you had some Pilar, VR, all these guys that, they were making some big plays, clutch plays. Jose Peraza, another guy, and you could go down the list, Billy McKinney. You could really just go down the list of the guys who made, some contributions. But now everybody's back, and they're still only 6 games above 500, 7 games above 500, just hovering around. And you start to think, Mike, I'll start off with you. Like this team, especially when you look at the lineup, it's just too inconsistent. And when they need to show up against teams like Pittsburgh, and you think they would bury them and, maybe get over that 10-game double-digit over 500 mark, they just can't. And you'll lose games like the Sunday before the break and then this game on Friday. It's just like, it's a little disappointing. Like, I think this Mets team is good. It's now just, can we take that next step? I think they will, but now it's starting to that time where now they have to.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up, there's a lot to touch on, which you talk about in those last couple of minutes. I mean, first off, you say 2007, and part of me just wants to crawl up into a ball and go into a corner somewhere. I don't want to hear any talk of 2007. Now, we're not in September yet, so I don't have to worry too much. But, when it comes to this Mets team, I think we're approaching the trade deadline, and I think the biggest thing that we see right now is this team has to make some moves. I've seen some other Met fans out there, some other people on Twitter say, we don't want to have like a Brody situation. We don't want to lose our prospects. We can't. This team is good enough. We can stand pat. Carrasco's going to come back. No. That's just not good enough. This team, you already see the Nationals. You already see the Phillies. These teams are trying to make some moves. The Braves. They're trying to make some moves. We see Jock Peterson moving into the division now. I mean, You cannot, even for the simple fact of the other teams are going to try to get better, you cannot stand pat at the deadline. We have to make some moves. You got to improve it. To me, the biggest problem, and it continues to be the offense. I just can't tolerate this team, and watching it's painful to watch. It's disgusting. I mean, if anyone sees my tweets on Twitter, it's a therapy session for me out there on weeknights, weekend nights, weekday, whatever. When I'm tweeting a Met game, and it always comes back to this offense. That's what annoys me the most. And it's been, we talked about the June swoon. Some people joked about that. That annoys me to no end. But basically, ever since that Orioles series, over a month and a half ago, this team has just failed to produce offensively. And like you said, these games against the Pirates, we're in the midst of 7 in a row against the Pirates, the worst team in baseball. And if you're going to be a playoff team, you have to capitalize on the bad teams. I mean, you think about what the Yankees have done in recent years against the Orioles. That's what's allowed them to be so good, not maybe this year, but in the division, raking up wins against bad teams. If the Mets want to be a playoff team, they have to win games against teams that struggle, like the Pirates. And second of all, they got to improve offensively. And like I said, to me, that means trade deadline acquisitions. And right on the top of my list, and Roche, I'd love to hear maybe some of your thoughts too, but right on the top of my list, Chris Bryant. That's who I think the Mets need to go after offensive wise. And also they need some pitching too, because Stroman's been up and down. You don't know where you're going to get out of McGill long term. They need some more depth in the rotation as well.
I agree with you on the lack of offensive production. And the only team that scored fewer runs than them is the Pittsburgh Pirates. You can't put up 1 run against the Pirates. You throw out a name like Chris Bryant, and I totally agree that they need to make a move. But I'm not sold on the Cubs complete garbage, dumpster fire sell. I don't think they're going to get rid of everyone, especially the position players. I just don't think you get that same return on a position player versus a pitcher. And they're almost a 500 team. They've got a shot at making, or in their division, they've got a shot at still making the playoffs. So I don't know if Chris Bryant's going to be automatically shipped out. And I think it would be a great fit for the Mets, but I just don't see them making that move.
Yeah, what I would just say to that quickly, and then obviously Andrew, you probably will jump on this too, but I think it was John Heyman, if I remember correctly, who tweeted out that essentially the Cubs are in sell mode, and moving Jock Peterson to the Braves was the first selling move. And I think it was also Heyman as well. It might have been maybe it was somebody else, but maybe it was Passan, I don't remember, who said that the Cubs are looking to get Rizzo and Baez long-term extensions, but guys like Kimbrel, guys like Bryant, and Bryant's a surprise because he's a big fan favorite and stuff like that, a homegrown guy, but he's a name that's been thrown out there as someone who's going to leave. And I think, and I'm not mistaken, Bryant is a Boris client, which obviously if you are a team that scares you, because Boris, is, look, I don't like him as a guy, but he does what he does for his clients and he gets the money, and it seems unlikely that Bryant's going to resign. I mean, he says he loves playing for the Cubs, but if you're worried about a guy resigning, you also look at the wild card situation in the NL. I think that, frankly, I know Milwaukee's kind of had some struggles as of late heading into the break, but I still like them for the division. St. Louis again has been up and down, and then the wild card I think is set with, it's going to be two West teams, and I think we can debate who will win the West. But essentially, if you're in the Central or you're in the East, it's about winning your division. And you're Chicago, you're at 500. You've already sold off Jock Peterson. You have impending free agents. And based on what the insiders are telling us, and I think he's available. And if he's available, you got to get him.
You got to get him for the right price, though. And if I'm Chicago, Chris Bryant's a legitimate MVP candidate this season. They're not just going to give him away for a bag of balls. So the Mets have to be ready to sacrifice something for a team that actually has a decent shot. They're in the same position as the Yankees are right now. And I wouldn't count them out from the playoffs.
I'm pretty sure the Cubs are, I think they're 2 games under. So again, that's kind of teetering of where they're 1 game under. And I'm pretty sure the Reds are better than them too, which is another thing that, they leapfrog another team. You already traded away Jock Peterson. I agree with you that you're going to have to give to get. That's always a situation you've got to give to get. I think Steve Cohen is willing to give to get. And that's something that with Chris Bryant, is a rental, so the price will go down just inherently from there. He's not a pitcher. The price goes inherently down from there. And again, I don't think they're going to re-sign him if they go out and get Rizzo and buy his long-term deals, because again, you talk about he's a Boris client and he's having a great year. So again, he's going to, being a Boris client and then having a big year, that all the leverage is in your favor. He's going to get paid next year. Now, he may not get paid with the Mets. Maybe that's something that you have to talk about, but at least to bring him on as a rental, see what he can do. I know the Mets, and just since I've been a fan, they've had some good success with rentals. Talk about Cespedes. Everyone was like, oh, they're going to bring him in. And obviously that trade worked out, huge for the Mets. And they gave up Michael Fulmer, which a lot of people like, oh, this would be too much. I haven't heard Michael Fulmer's name a lot, so again, and that's why you like to go all in, because you talk about how many prospects actually do work out. And that's something that even with the Stroman trade, and I know Brody and that trade is going to probably continue to get maybe criticized or talked about, but Stroman's still here pitching for the Mets and he's giving value to the team. And I know they gave up prospects, but I think it was Woods Richardson. He's not in the league right now. Who would have known what he'll do in the future, but the Mets are in win now mode. And I think obviously it's good that they have Marcus Stroman in their rotation. And I think that when you look at these deadline deals, and especially Chris Bryant, you bring him into this lineup and just going over this Mets team, they basically have a former All-Star at almost every position. You have one at James McCann at catcher, first base Alonso, second base McNeil. Lindor's a former All-Star. If you had Bryant's an All-Star. You have Conforto out and right. He was a former All-Star. You just look at all these positions, you got really solid players. Nimmo, I know he hasn't made an all-star team, but he's really been a spark plug for the team since he's gotten back from injury. And just at a certain point, when is this lineup going to wake up? Because I thought they were going to be a top 5 offense in the NL. It just hasn't happened. And all of these guys, and I do think it falls on guys in the clubhouse, like Conforto only hitting 200 in a contract year. He's going to have to step up, in my opinion. And that's something that's, it's just like 200. He's hitting 200, and Mets fans were calling for him to get that big contract extension. And you can really go down the list between Dom Smith and all these guys that really should be contributing, and they're just not right now consistently. And that's why this team is only 6 games over. You turn to the pitching, like Mike, as you said, you don't know what you're going to get out of McGill long term, Carrasco, Syndergaard whenever he comes back. I think you need a 5th starter, Bartolo maybe type guy that you can add in there just to eat up some innings, and you'll probably have a bullpen guy too. But again, I think it falls on the hitting. This hitting has to get better, and I think Chris Bryant would help that a good amount.
Yeah, talking more about the pitching now, I think that There's been talk of Barrios with Minnesota. There's been talk of, I've seen a couple people say, hey, what about a package deal for Kyle Hendricks to go with Chris Bryant? Now, I don't know how much you have to give, but, you need another starter in this rotation because injuries, with the offense, it's just been simple lack of production. I mean, obviously you had the whole mob squad thing, but even when the guys have been healthy, when McNeil's been in there, when Dom's been in there, when, Nimmo's been good, when Conforto, like you said, has been in there, they're not producing. Whereas with the pitching, it's more like when they're healthy, they're doing fine. I mean, Stroman's kind of, been wavering a little bit, but, Peterson's out for a while now, and, we just don't really know. So I think they really need to add a starter. Who that is, I don't know. But in terms of giving up prospects and stuff, I mean, look, you got to roll the dice. I know a lot of fans are like thinking about back to Brody, and I mentioned that before about like, oh, we don't want to give up too much, but like you got to give something enough to try to win. And I hear that the Cubs are scouting JT Ginn down in Single A St. Lucie. I don't know a lot about JT, but I do know that we got Kumar Rocker. I know that we got Matt Allen. So I mean, losing one pitcher, I mean, is that really going to kill us? But this team. What's so frustrating to me about this team, and just to touch on the offense again, just very quickly, is you mentioned that, they have all these former All-Stars, these guys who are great, but like outside of Lindor, who obviously has been kind of underperforming, who on this team has like a long track record of success? I mean, you talk about McNeil, a couple really good seasons. Alonso, one really great year, was down last year. Dom had just one great year. Nimmo, a couple good years. Conforto, like last year was really the year that he really put it all together. I know he was an all-star a few years ago, but that was like kind of an up and down season. I mean, you look at McCann, I mean, he's coming off of just one great year. There is no one in this Mets lineup. And I understand that we have all-stars. We have guys that have played great at times who, if they play to their greatest seasons, they can be great. But the problem is that we don't have a guy like, and I'm just going to look at the crosstown Yankees, like a Aaron Judge, who has put in year after year of success, or elsewhere in the league, like a Jose Altuve or someone like that, or a Xander Bogaerts, who is like shown consistently that they can put up the numbers. And that's my biggest fear with the offense, is that I hear people say, like you said, Andrew, that on paper, this is a great offensive team. But for me, what I see is a bunch of guys who, and I don't want it to be this way. I love this team. I hope to make the playoffs. But my fear is this just a bunch of one-hit wonders? Is that why we're underperforming? People, they fired the hitting coach and they promoted Hugh Quantelbaum, and they're still performing poorly. At what point do you say, maybe it's not the hitting coach, maybe it's just the guys? So
Donnie Stevens got to go.
Don't talk to me about Donnie Stevenson. Every time I see that guy, I want to vomit. It's disgusting. But as a Met fan, I'm born to be skeptical, and we have to make some acquisitions, but when it comes to the offense and the way it's currently constituted, I'm concerned because I don't see a lot of just proven people. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and going off of that, I know the guy that I'm about to throw out is the self-proclaimed, best power hitter in the league. But how consistent is a guy like Pete Alonso? I mean, he hasn't been the guy that he was as a rookie. And I know you're talking about one-hit wonders, and he's a stud. But is he the guy that we once thought he was?
Oh, yeah, I mean, go ahead. He's not going to hit 53 home runs again. I mean, it's hard to hit 53 home runs. Like, I'm not going to, especially it was really a perfect storm between obviously first year in the league and the juice balls. If they were, I'm pretty sure we all know that they were juiced. And if he could be a 35 home run guy, which I know he's got 17 right now, if he can turn it on in the second half, maybe he gets to around 30, 35. And he's never going to be a 300 hitter. Like, he's never going to be like an Aaron Judge who hit like 330 one year. He's just not that guy. He's your power hitting first baseman, which you need. And like, I think that he, is definitely, I think, taking on that role. Probably make a few all-star games. And I mean, he's definitely a great piece. To me, I think Lindor is your guy. He was supposed to be, you signed him to be your guy. And you talked about, Mike, about you need consistent, guys, like you're talking about Bogaerts and all those guys. Like, Lindor was supposed to be that. And it's just, so far it hasn't happened, and we'll see with the injury. But like, that's where you got to start to lean on guys like Lindor, guys like, I mean, if you get Bryant, to even Conforto, like he's got to, not hit 200. Like, as much as you said he was a one-year wonder last year, he's had some good seasons. Had 2015 when he came up, 2017 he was an all-star, and even 2019, the second half of 2019, he played really well. And at a certain point, these guys, they got to step up. Even McNeil, I think he's starting to hit a little bit of a stride. I think I saw yesterday he's up over like 258, 260, right around there. So if he can continue to raise his batting average, it's just like there's so many. Just when you look at the team, there's just a lot of I think spots that are already filled, and I think third base is the only one where you're like, okay, we're going to add there. And then you're hoping everyone else can hit, because you look at 2019, and I'll say it again. Like, I think this team is, primed for that 2019, just to go on a 10-game winning streak, or 14 out of 15, or whatever they did. I think this team's going to do it. I don't know if it's going to be, late July or August, but I think this team's primed for that run where everyone hits their stride at the right time. Maybe I'm just being too optimistic, but it was kind of like this in 2019. They just lulled throughout the first half, and they were bad throughout the first half. They didn't have the pitching like the Mets do now. They didn't have the bullpen like they do now. And then the hitting kind of carried them through the second half. I'm hoping that it happens again. I actually think that they're going to go on that run. I think Bryant would be the spark plug that gets them on their run. You got the black jerseys coming back. I think it would, just clubhouse morale will go up if that all happens.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, and one other thing I want to touch on, I know we're going to talk about the Yankees too in a minute, but all this talk of the Mets, I think we got to mention Luis Rojas and the job that he's done, because I feel like when it comes to Rojas, there's not a lot of in-between opinions. It's either you think that he's a manager of the year candidate with all the injuries and overcoming that, or you think he's atrocious. I've never heard anyone kind of just play it down the middle, which is where I kind of think it belongs. But that being said, my biggest issue with Rojas right now, and let me say this, I like him as a person. I think he is a good guy. I like the way that he rides the umpires. I think it's hilarious. One of the best things that came out of the Mets finally reaching vaccination status, aside from the fact that it keeps them safe, is that we get to see Rojas without a mask on, yelling at umpires, which has been great theater. Nothing like Mickey Callaway, which is, well, for a lot of reasons, but great theater to see. But when it comes to Rojas, my biggest concern is he's a player manager, which is what most managers are these days. But I get this feeling sometimes from game to game that the guys, and we saw it after there was that brief losing streak where it was like, we're in first place, we're fine. Like this team, seems to lack a sense of urgency. And to me, that kind of comes from the manager. That's where I'm kind of guessing it comes from. I don't notice, and we saw it last night with the fight with Stroman, which was something I'd like to see more of, a little more fire, a little more fight, which we get with Stroman a lot, not so much with a lot of the other guys. Maybe with Pilar, we get that. Pete, we get that. But it seems like there's this like complicity with losing sometimes, like, oh, we're okay, we're in first. And maybe what the Mets need, quite honestly, because they've been in first for so long, is to like maybe fall back in the pack a little bit and maybe like kind of snap them out of it and wake them up. But I'm just kind of curious, quickly what you guys think of Rojas, because for me, I see some good and I see some bad. And I like to know where you guys stand on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive to see what he's done in spite of all the injuries, but you're only 3 games up on the Phillies. I mean, they're a team that I think is going to be active at the deadline. I'm hearing names like Gallo and even Byron Buxton if the Twins are, going to sell everyone. So if the Phillies go out and make a move, that puts a lot of pressure on him to perform.
I think I'm kind of down the middle with Rojas. He reminds me a lot of Terry Collins, just like, and like that players play for him. And I love that. Like, I love players playing for him. The in-game stuff, like, I think every manager, especially now, I think everyone's going to argue about who they should have put in. And, it's great to be, an armchair manager, or, they say football armchair quarterback. Like, it's great to do that. Like, he's hit, like Rojas, you talk about the Sunday game, he didn't hit the right buttons. And I think that was probably one of, you talk about, that's probably one of the worst instances of it this season, where he just did not hit the right buttons. Some games he has hit the right buttons. He's hit, Diaz in the right time for 4 out saves, Lugo the right time for 2 innings, and everyone's all happy. It's just like, again, I think you're going to see his in-game managing skills. It may not be the best, but I think that when you look at how he's handles the locker room, just like Terry Collins, the guys like to play for him. The guys, you saw in 2015 when the Mets won, everyone was so happy for Terry. I think it will be similar for Rojas. Rojas was in the organization for a while. A lot of these guys, they know him from minor leagues and that type of stuff. I think that does matter. And I think we have to see what he does down the stretch. I think if they got into the postseason, how does he manage a postseason roster is a lot different to how you manage a regular season roster. I think all of that, definitely plays into it. But we're talking about the Mets manager. Got to move over to the Yankees and their manager and Aaron Boone and this whole Yankee situation. They sit 2 games over 500, 4th in the AL East, though. And I think everyone's going to go to the COVID outbreak here against the Red Sox, where they have 6 players: Aaron Judge, Gio Urshela, Kyle Higashioka, Loaizaga, Cortez, Wandy Peralta. They're all test positive, and they won't be available for, at least a few games. And, the Yankees, they play yesterday, only get 3 hits, lose 4-0. They just looked really flat with those replacements in. And it just seems like every time, like Jack, you said in the open, every time it looks like they're going to hit a hot stretch, stuff like this happens where, they just fall apart and then you get swept by the Red Sox. And then before you know it, you're 0-7 against the Red Sox and against your division rivals. And I think that falls on Aaron Boone as much as maybe it'd be unfair to say it, but when you go into this series, when you really need to start winning games, like this is the series where they had to get going and they don't, and they lose this game 4-0 where you have 3 hits and no fight. Like that to me is like, where is this team falling? You talk about Rojas when they had their replacements in, the Mets were playing for him. And now, you see with Boone, just even this game, not a lot of fight. And they went down pretty feebly, in that game. So Jack, I'll start off with you because they are playing your Red Sox. This Yankees team just, I don't really know. What's your thoughts this series going into it? And do you think Aaron Boone is really starting to get on that hot seat?
Well, you can be upset about the COVID situation, and I don't really know what kind of take I can personally make out of it. But the reality of the situation is if you get swept, you're 0-9 against the Red Sox on the season, and you're 500. You're sitting at 500 right at the trade deadline. And there's no one move you can make that's going to take you from the 4th place team to, the 2nd or 1st place team. So I think the Yankees are in a tough position. And I do think that the voices, or the rumors around Boone are going to grow louder, but I do think they should give him the whole season. Like it just doesn't make sense to bring in a new manager at this time. So I think they're going to stick it out with him for, whatever that results in. I don't see them becoming a real contender, but I do think they're going to give him the whole season.
Yeah, I would say with Boone, we'll get more later in the show, I guess, what we think about, their playoff chances and, where they think we'll end up at the end of the season. But, they get rid of Girardi after 2017 when they lost in the ALCS. That was a debated move. Maybe it was time there for too long. They bring in Boone. And you look what happened. We can debate the roster construction with Cashman. Has he done a good job? I think they need more left-handed power. The rotation hasn't always really been up to snuff. But that being said, they have year in, year out, one of the more talented rosters of baseball. And, Cashman is one of the more talented GMs at putting together teams. Now this year, I don't know, maybe so much, but the point is that they always have a great team. And when you look at Boone, they've always made the playoffs, but they always just keep falling short, whether it's losing the CS in 19 or, losing in 2020 in the DS or 2018 in the DS. Like they had the talent, they dominate in the regular season and they get to the playoffs and they fall short. And at the end of the day, when do we start looking at the manager to blame for that kind of stuff? Maybe what this team needs, honestly, and I think, I've heard, I don't remember the year, but honestly, the Yankees actually haven't fired a manager in the season since the early 90s. This was even before Buck Showalter, the last time they fired a manager within season. So the likelihood of that happening is very rare with this team. But that being said, maybe that's what this team needs to wake them up. I don't know, because like we talk about the Mets looking asleep. I think the Yankees, quite frankly, have been in a daze this whole season. They got out of the gate slow, and they really haven't been able to put together a strong run. So with Boone, honestly, anything short of a World Series appearance, I don't think he's back after this season. And I think maybe in season firing, even though not likely, maybe that's what this team needs.
Don't you think that would have happened already, though, if they were going to fire him mid-season?
I think it probably would have happened. I think his seat was definitely hotter a while ago. But that being said, we're past the midway point now, so he's definitely going to be here to stay. That being said, it's tough to watch. Who knows? He's definitely not going to be here after this year unless they appear in the World Series, in my opinion.
It's this Yankees team. I think they're at the crossroads of their season, and if they get swept by the Red Sox and you're at 500, and let's say you lose a few more series, and you're under 500 a day before the trade deadline, I'd maybe start thinking about selling. And, as much as, I know this Yankees team, you have so much money and so many different guys, and maybe you chalk it up as just one bad year and go back next year with a new manager and you think everything's okay. But how many more times are you going to go back and okay, the same team, Aaron Judge, he's going to have to get paid on top of Stanton, on top of Cole, on top of Chapman. And you just start thinking, where is this team, going? Are they just going to throw all this money into guys? If I was 3 games under, 4 games under, and I was out this year, you'd have to start unloading. I think guys, maybe it's not Judge. I think Sanchez, I would probably, to be honest with you, I think he's a guy that has had a pretty good season. He's just had such an up and down career. So you're hoping you can get a good amount for him because he's having a pretty solid year. And I think some team would definitely, when you talk about catchers and the amount of hitting catchers in the league not being so high, I think some team would definitely, a playoff team would definitely want him. Judge, a lot of teams will want him. You'll get a lot in return. I don't know if the Yankees would do that midseason. Maybe that's more of an offseason trade if they wanted to really break everything up. And like that's where I would start thinking of this team is, you could look at that pitching staff. Maybe a few guys would, you could trade a few pitchers if you needed to. I just think if you're going to fall out and not play well against the division, I would start thinking about selling. And on the flip side, if they start winning games and they show some fight, I would try to add Gallo. I'd try to add a pitcher. I think they're really at this crossroads. And I think the worst thing for the Yankees, if they just stay at this 2 games over mark and they say, okay, we'll stay pat, and they don't make the playoffs, you're stuck with all these contracts and you're in a situation where you're going into the same thing next year and you're hoping for a different result with the same team. That I think would be definitely the worst part for the Yankees. And honestly, I think we're going to see an extreme one way or the other. I'm not sure yet, but I think it'll be one or the other.
Yeah. I mean, if they don't make any moves and, don't ultimately win World Series, I think that this organization really needs to take a look in the mirror and question what that identity is, because you've got Cole, you've got Judge, and, you've got other guys around you, but they're just running the same lineup year in, year out, and they're not getting the result that they need. So, changes need to be made, and whether that's manager, whether that's players, pitchers, we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely will be a very interesting conversation with these Yankees in the upcoming weeks. But I do think that'll wrap up our conversation on the Mets and Yankees. Always really fun. Next, Jack and I will sit down with new Fordham Baseball alum, unanimous 2021 All-American, and new member of the San Francisco Giants organization, Matt Mikulski. But first, we're going to take a quick break. You are listening to One on One on 90.7 FM.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
To One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Jack Roche, and we are joined by new Fordham Baseball alum, unanimous 2021 All-American, A-10 pitcher of the year, and now the 50th overall selection by the San Francisco Giants in this year's MLB draft. Matt Mikulski, how you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
And you just start, looking at all those accolades. That's just, you can go for forever to name them, but I want to start by saying congratulations for being selected by the Giants in the draft. And I want to ask you about what that feeling was like when you finally got the call saying that you were going to be joining the Giants.
It was just kind of just all the work, all the dedication, all the sacrifice, proven to myself that it was worth it, and I think, like you said, all that stuff came along this year, but at the same time, I was just going into this year, and the one thing I wanted so badly was just to be the A-10 pitcher of the year, and I think just having that one goal and then everything else coming afterwards, I think I knew if I took care of that, everything else would come as well. So, yeah.
Matt, I was hoping you could take us back to last year's draft, not getting selected where you wanted to go, and how you were able to make the adjustments that helped you reach the point that you're at now.
Yeah, obviously last year's draft was disappointing. It was kind of a crazy draft, being a 5-round draft, going from 40 to 5. And, after not going, kind of looked at myself in the mirror, and I kind of knew right away that I was coming back to Fordham, told Coach Layton that I was coming right back, and for me, it didn't make sense jumping in the portal. That's just not the type of person who I am. Like I'm a loyal guy, and they believed in me when I was this 5'8", 165-pound kid in high school, and I believed in them. So I definitely already had that in my mind, and just looking at myself in the mirror, just thinking, what can I do to separate myself from the pack, especially being from a Fordham, being a mid-major guy. I know I have to work above and beyond to get that recognition. But at the same time, for me, it wasn't like, oh, I need to prove everybody wrong. Like, it was more so like, I need to prove myself right, and because I know what I see when I look in the mirror, and that's pretty much it, and I think we made the necessary adjustments, me and my team back at home. And yeah, it was very easy for people to be like, oh, it was the short arm action that's why he's throwing harder and stuff like that. But for me, it was like, it wasn't just that, it was all of that accumulating together. I think like the short arm action helped me stay into my bottom half a little bit more. And I think staying in my bottom half a little bit more helped me get more velocity, more command on most of my pitches. And then obviously with the shorter arm action, I saw immediately like all my stuff was sharper and harder. So I think like from that, not only did it give me more confidence than I already had, but it was just like, all right, like I can prove to myself that I could throw 4 pitches for a strike, so. No.
Yeah, and Jack, he asked about obviously the draft and the COVID and all that stuff, and obviously you had your season 2020 cut short. How do you feel like that affected you personally with being able to grow, maybe have a little more time in the offseason because the season was truncated? Did you feel like that helped? Did that hurt your rhythm maybe, as it's obviously a very abnormal year? Like, was that something that really changed maybe how you went about things?
Well, I mean, I think obviously when the year ended, the COVID year ended, I had some 4 like really good starts. And then I actually just kept going. Like I came home and I would like sneak onto my high school field and like keep throwing and keep doing my routine every single day. And then especially when I got up to the draft, like I was just getting more and more prepared just in case I did get drafted and I was going to get shipped off somewhere. But then obviously it didn't happen. So I took about like a 10-day break, and then that's when it was kind of just like, all right, back to the drawing board and kind of getting back to work. And that one question kind of just kept coming back into my head. What can I do to separate myself from the rest of the pack? And like one of the things was to throw harder more consistently. And like my junior year, I was probably 92, 94, touching 95. This year, I was more so like 94 to 97, touching 98, 99. So like, I think going to the drawing board, I wanted to do what I needed to do, and I ended up doing it. And I think that's why, like you said, with all those accolades, I think that's a reason why all those accolades came, because I told myself that I was going to do something and I went out there and did it. So.
You mentioned that shorter arm action, and I've heard you toss out guys named like Lucas Giolito, Robbie Ray, watching tape of those guys. And I was just curious if there were any other big leaguers that you've been able to draw inspiration from or learn something from them.
Yeah, I mean, another one of those guys in that group was Zach Plesac. I think that was more so with the short arm action stuff. But like for me, when I'm trying to focus on picking guys off, like I'm looking at an Andy Pettit, or if I'm looking at somebody who's got a lot of fire, I'm looking at a CC Sabathia, so like I try and look at lefties obviously and try and just get my game from each and every little bit. Like I try and make my curveball as much as like Barry Zito's curveball, and I think like just taking little bits and pieces from everybody and trying to make myself into the best version I could possibly be. I think that's something that a lot of people sleep on. You could obviously, a lot of people have confidence in themselves. I have extreme confidence in myself, but there was guys who came before me and there's going to be guys who come after me who are going to be doing the same thing. And with guys before me, like, you could always learn from, doesn't matter what era of baseball they played in, you could always learn. So I think that was the biggest thing. And also like a Dallas Keuchel fielding wise, like, I think that was the one thing that I wanted to do a lot better this year as well, was to field my position a lot better. And I think like the numbers showed with that as well. I don't think I made an error on the year. So
yeah, so I want to go into your dominant 2021 campaign. I actually called one of your games, and I remember seeing all the scouts with the guns and all of that, and there obviously a lot of eyes on you. What was that like, just quickly moving up draft boards so quickly, your publicity growing? What was that for you, obviously having a ton of success and seeing maybe, your name rise and shoot up those draft boards?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I went up to the Cape, it's nothing new to me. So I saw like a lot of guns pointed at me and stuff like that. A lot of people at games and stuff. So I think for me, like, that just adds a fire in me, and especially this year when we go to away games, or even like when I wasn't pitching or somebody else on our team's pitching and there's no one there, So for me, it was like, all right, like, this gets me up and going, and at the same time, like, it's still that voice in the back of my head, like, I got to prove everybody right, and like, I got to prove myself right and prove everybody else wrong, So I think like having that experience and having people at those games, I couldn't thank Mr. Cole like anymore. I mean, he's a big reason why those scouts were able to come to the games and stuff like that. And yeah, it was definitely different just because it was just scouts there. But at the same time, like, I think it was more so just, all right, like, it's back to showcase ball. Like, I'm showcasing my talents, and every single time I come out here, like, I got to prove that these kids don't even deserve to be in the box against me. So, yeah.
You're a lefty who can hit upper 90s with 4 pitches in the arsenal, which is something that very few guys can boast. What are you going to have to do to continue to evolve in the San Francisco system?
I think for me is just fine tuning the armor. I think I throw a plus slider, I throw a plus changeup, and I think that curveball that I throw at the same time is a change of pace pitch, and I could throw it anywhere, anytime, and I think for me, the confidence is always there. The mental confidence is always there. And I think my mental toughness is uncompared to anybody else, And I think for that being said, like, I think what I need to work on the most is just going out there and keep working hard, and keep fine tuning the armor, keep throwing everything with command, and be consistent. I think that was the one thing that I did really well this year in my 2021 campaign. If you look at my freshman, sophomore, maybe even a little bit of my junior year highlights, like, it was a little inconsistent, So I think this year, my senior year, I was the most consistent I've ever been on a baseball field. And I think if I'm able to just keep that going, I think the sky's the limit,
And as you said, sky's the limit, and I completely agree with that. And obviously, you have a bright future ahead. But I want to look, a little rewind a bit at your time at Fordham, as through all the accolades, the awards, the team doing well in the 2019 A-10 title. Was there one thing that stuck out, one moment, one memory that really stuck out to you at your time at Fordham?
I'll give you 2. First one is my sophomore year, obviously thrown in that A-10 championship game. That season was just a very, very special season, from being a pretty mediocre team at the halfway mark. And then with our last 3 weekends, we had to win 7 of our last 9 games, won 7 of our last 9 games, made the playoffs. And then I would say that moment was starting in the A-10 championship game as a sophomore and striking out the side against Dayton, a team that, a week before put up 8 runs on me. And that was probably my worst start of my career, and I think I went out there with kind of just that chip on my shoulder, like I always have, and kind of going out there, striking out the side the first inning, and then just being like, all right, like, game on, and I think obviously moving forward to that, throwing in the West Virginia game, that was just a crazy memory I'll never forget. Obviously, I didn't start that game, but still went in there and did my job. And that was another memory that I'll never forget. And then finally, I think the one last memory that I'll never forget is the last game of my Fordham career, going out there, breaking the strikeout record, single season and career. And then at the same time, that last inning, as a Fordham Ram, going through my head, it's not the championships that I've won or the stuff that I've done as an amateur and the tournaments that I won as a high schooler and stuff. But I think going through my head in that seventh inning against Bonaventures is all the guys that I'm still friends with to this day. That's what kind of was making me emotional in that last inning, and then throwing that last pitch and striking that last kid out and just kind of being like, there it is. That's the amateur career, and yeah, those are a couple memories for me. And obviously off the field, like those guys that we won the championship with in 2019, like I still text them to this day. Every single one of them texting me congratulations, and like those are my brothers until the day I die, and I can't wait to get back to Fordham for us to celebrate and stuff like that. And yeah, it's just a lot of great memories at Fordham. And I wear it as a little badge of pride on my sleeve, especially when I'm going to these like draft combines and even the draft itself, being the mid-major guy that's here, and that's something that I'll wear on my sleeve for the rest of my life, the rest of my career,
A unanimous 2020 All-American, 8-time Picture of the Year, and now a member of the San Francisco Giants organization. Thank you for joining us, Matt.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
And definitely good luck on your career. We'll be right back on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show.
Be sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVsports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org. This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org.
Welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I am Michael Leegan, and I got you covered with the latest headlines. So let's start off on the hardwood, where there is a potential storm brewing in Portland. Early on Friday, it was reported by basketball website True Hoop that Trailblazers star Damian Lillard would ask for a trade in the near future. Although Lillard denied the rumors, the six-time All-Star, who is currently playing for Team USA, said, quote, "I haven't made any firm decision on what my future will be. A lot of things go into it," unquote. Lillard also made it clear that the Blazers need to put action behind their words and show a true commitment to winning a championship. So there's a lot to unpack here between the potential trade and then denying the trade. So much to get into. Maybe where can he go if there is a trade, or who can the Blazers bring in if the team's going to improve. So, Andrew and Jack, let's get started on this. I'll start off with Andrew. What do you think about Lillard's comments, and do you think he's really going to be staying with the Blazers this season?
I have a feeling he's going to be traded. I just think that, when you look at what the Blazers have been doing, it seems like they're just in that NBA purgatory where they're always like a 5th seed or a 6th seed, and maybe they make a run once to the Western Conference Finals, and maybe they make one run, but for the most part, it's first, second rounds, and just because of contracts and everything, they got Lillard, McCollum, obviously, and then they usually get the veterans to get them to a certain point, but they're never like that finals team. And I think Lillard, as much as I think he likes, Portland and, the franchise, and I know he wanted to stay there for the rest of his career, I think he also wants to win a championship, especially when you see guys around you starting to win championships, and you start to think about what's my legacy going to be. And I don't think he only just cares about his legacy, but I think especially when you see your peers start winning and whatever it may be, and he's starting to get older, 31, you may want out. And to who? I mean, I think everyone in New York's going to want him to go to the Knicks. Obviously, if it's the right trade, you just look at Lillard. He's just such a great player. Over 25 points per game in the last 6 years. Like, this guy scores. Like, he's definitely, that apex scorer. I mean, for the Knicks, it kind of would remind you of that Carmelo Anthony trade that really didn't work out fully for the Knicks. Obviously, he had some fun times, but it just kind of reminds you a little bit of that. Just a guy that is that apex scorer, and he's been clutch in the playoffs for sure. It's now, can he kind of hit that next level of his game, and can he get the right players around him to hit the next level of his game? We'll see. I just don't think it's going to be in Portland. So I don't know if it's this year or coming up, but I don't think he's going to stay much longer in Portland.
Yeah, the NBA has changed so much over the past few decades. And I think something that we see a lot of, whether you like it or not, but team loyalty isn't what it once was. And Damian Lillard has kind of been that guy that you kind of assume was going to be in Portland his whole career, and seemed pretty happy there. But they can't win. They're not good enough to win. And it's too bad. Just the type of guy that he is. I don't think he's going to come outright and just fully demand a trade. But when you see a guy like James Harden, who just outright asks for it and ultimately gets what he wants, it's tough to not tease that idea. So, you see Dame, have some like lukewarm comments about the team, but not fully come out and say he wants a trade, and not fully say he's confident in the future. So I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see where he ends up, if he stays, if he leaves. But all I know is it doesn't seem like he's super happy right now.
Yeah, what I would say is, well, first off, like you guys are talking about, what makes Dame so likable is the loyalty to Portland. I mean, Roche, you said it, just no one stays where they are. I mean, we think about, obviously LeBron and, KD and just everyone, the biggest stars all leave. So the fact that he's been so committed, he's been there his whole career since like 2012, I believe, it's amazing that he's been here for so long. But that being said, whether he wants to trade or he doesn't want to trade, maybe a trade is what's, best for him overall, whether he wants to stay in Portland and win there. I mean, they fired Terry Stotts. They hired Chauncey Billups in the offseason. They still got some good players. They got Nurkic. They got CJ McCollum over there still. I mean, you still have a very good team. I mean, whether you want to say Melo is still a great contributor, it's up to you. But, what reminds me, and we talked about it before, was like briefly, was like Girardi, how he'd been there forever as the manager of the Yankees. But like, there was just like, they just couldn't get over the hill. And maybe it was time for a change. And maybe that's the same thing with Dame. I mean, they've made the playoffs for like 8 consecutive seasons, but they keep, 4 of the last 5 have been first round exits. I mean, maybe it's time. He's given everything he can to the city. They've tried different combinations of players. They've brought in different coaches. I don't know what they can do in free agency to make some kind of drastic change, but maybe, and I think he's a good guy. I don't think he's going to demand a trade publicly like that, but maybe it's what's best for the organization and for him as a player to kind of separate. And, looking at it from a basketball point of view, I mean, it also reminds me a lot of like LeBron, his first team with Cleveland, just couldn't get over the hump. Now that teams around him were not as well put together. I think this team, this GM and this organization has done a better job of giving Dame support, but sometimes what you need is a change of scenery. And, maybe that's what's best for Dame and best for the organization.
I think with stars in the NBA, especially how the league's changed, it's either, you stay on one team and the team brings in other stars that leave their home team, or you saw it with Curry. Like Curry's been, in Golden State for forever, but obviously they built around him, brought in KD, and he's been that homegrown guy, but obviously they've built amazing teams around him. And then you see guys, even like Harden, they brought in Chris Paul. It's just like, and then at a certain point, those guys go away, or, if you're Lillard, those guys really, the right guys never come. And then you're like, oh, I probably have to, leave. And maybe the Blazers try to make that one last effort to build around him again. That's possible. I mean, but that's also on the team. Do they want to do that? Or maybe they want a clean slate as well. It's like, that's kind of, I just feel like it's probably more often than not, or, more likely than not, that he just ends up leaving. I would say relatively soon. I don't see the Blazers going out and getting that, other CJ McCollum's solid, but I don't think he's that next star you probably need to win a championship. And I don't see the Blazers bringing in a guy like that, which probably leads me more likely to think that Lillard ends up getting traded.
And let's say that Lillard does want out of town. You got to think about what team can offer the best package. And unfortunately,
take on his contract.
Yeah, I mean, he's 31 years old. Yeah. I mean, I think the peak for point guards is 28 to 32, right? So, you have to think that he's going to start that decline relatively soon. I mean, we've seen guys like Chris Paul that can last the test of time, but you got to have a team that is somewhat ready to contend and can still give a good package. And there aren't too many of those teams in the league right now.
Yeah, I mean, when we're thinking about potential trade candidates, I mean, first off, I think Philly is one. I mean, the question is with Philly, they were right in there on the heart of trade, and then Brooklyn kind of just emptied it up a little bit more, and they fell to the back of the pack. Can they offer the same kind of firepower to Portland? I mean, who knows? The question with them is, like, apparently Philly wants to get rid of Ben Simmons. Like, does Portland even want Ben Simmons? Does anyone want Ben Simmons? Like, is that even like an enticing trade piece? Another team to think about is Golden State. I mean, I know we talk about them all the time with, like, they got KD. It's like, it always seems like they're like, I've never been a fan of Golden State. I know our producer Wolves will not like to hear that, but it's not something I want to see happen. But when you think about it, it could happen. I mean, they had the number 7 overall pick. They got Andrew Wiggins. They got James Wiseman. These are all pieces that you can use to trade for Damian Lillard. I mean, Clay and Steph are going to be there. Now, the question is, like, can Steph and Dame play together? I mean, I don't really know how that would work. But, I mean, that's a potential. And then, of course, for our friends in the New York market, I don't know how realistic this is, but, of course, every Knicks fan I know, the Knicks. Would I love to see that? Would that be great? Would that be, honestly, the biggest star, I think, in New York? Say what you will about Melo. I think that would be the best player to play for the Knicks since Patrick Ewing, in my opinion. Would that be great? Sure. But what can the Knicks give up? I mean, if you want to keep Julius, who, honestly, I'm very shaken on after the whole playoff performance. So it'll be Julius and Dame, and then you're going to get rid of RJ probably. You're going to get rid of Obi. Who is going to be the supporting cast? And then, honestly, he'll probably be in a worse situation than he was in Portland. So there's so many things to think about with a trade. Honestly, as I've listed those 3 teams, maybe the best for everyone is Golden State, as much as that pains me to say.
The Golden State, 3 guards. I mean, how small is this team going to play?
I don't know.
3 guards, and then if you're getting rid of Wiseman, and if he gets, like, who's playing? Like, that's my issue with Clay. Like, if Clay's there, like, maybe Clay would get traded then, which I don't know if Steph would really like that. I mean, I feel like to have 3 guards, also, like, Clay and Steph, they're going to take their shots, and Dame's going to take his shots. It's like that big 3 is just like the big 3 of guards. I don't think we've really ever seen something, that much like that. Like, when you look at all the other big 3s, at least they have a big man. I mean, I guess the Nets would be the closest to that, but KD is obviously like 7 foot or 6'11", however tall he is. And, like, I feel like that would just be, I don't know if that would work. I guess the Lakers would be another team if, that would be, I think, a team that could work. But then you have so many contracts, and do you want to give up all of that depth that, Lakers maybe could get for a guy like Lillard? The Knicks, I think, are just an interesting one. Like, if I'm the Knicks, I try to bring in Dame because, Mike, as you said, if he's your best player since Patrick Ewing, you want to bring that guy in the building. Now, you're probably going to have to give up RJ Barrett, probably a lot of your depth. I still think if you're bringing back, Julius Randle, and again, you're hoping that Mitch Robinson comes back and that's your 2 down low. I don't know who your guard and forward would be, small forward, your guard opposite Lillard, but that would be an interesting. I think the Knicks would get better, but then again, how much better are we talking here? I just think that would be interesting to see. If I'm the Knicks, I'd almost try to get a free agent, just trading all your assets to get a guy. We saw it with Melo. I don't know if that's the completely right move, but to get a guy like Dame, I mean, you got to at least try. and see what the price is. But that's just kind of, what I'm thinking is just, it's tough to move that contract and then also, get a lot in return as well.
You think a team like Minnesota would kick the tires on Dame? Because I really think that they have like more assets than any other team. They do have that veteran, like let's say you give up D'Angelo Russell and, picks and the guy they drafted 5th overall. I'm blanking on his name, but I think they could put together a pretty enticing package.
I mean, I think it could be interesting. I mean, the question is also, I don't know, does Dame have a no trade clause? Is he able to dictate where he goes? Because, I mean, would he want to go to Minnesota? I mean, I don't. I mean, like also, if you're Minnesota, do you just want picks? I mean, excuse me, if you're Portland, do you just want picks back? Do you want someone that can actually help? Because, like as long as you keep your other pieces, I mean, you're not going to maybe be a playoff contender, but I mean, who knows? I mean, there's a lot to go into with that whole situation, a lot of other things to break down, but we got some other headlines to get to. So appreciate your thoughts on Dame, guys. Definitely some interesting stuff. So on a related note, of course, as I mentioned before, Damian Lillard is over playing with Team USA. So moving on to our second headline, where we're going to talk more about the national team, because on Friday, it was announced that Nuggets center JaVale McGee and Spurs forward Keldon Johnson would replace Kevin Love and Bradley Beal on the U.S. men's national team. Beal was forced to drop out of the Olympics after entering COVID health and safety protocols, while Love is still recovering from a right calf injury that kept him out for most of the season. The roster moves coming after a very tumultuous period of exhibition games for the United States. Of course, there was a lot of talk about the loss to Nigeria and Australia, of course. So, guys, your thoughts on these two new additions for the national team and, just kind of how things have shaped out so far, because we're heading into this Olympics. I don't think there's been as shaky a national team going to the Olympics in quite some time. Jack, we'll start off with you.
I wanted to hate the JaVale McGee addition, but honestly, I'm a fan of it. And I learned the other day that the Olympic rules in regards to big men are a little different than how they do in the NBA. So you can stand in the paint for as long as you want. There's no defensive 3-second rule. So having an enforcer like him is huge. And yeah, do I think a guy like Christian Wood is deserving of that spot? Probably. He's really talented. But I think JaVale McGee gives you a huge boost on defense. You can also grab the ball after it takes one bounce off the rim. That's not a goaltend if you go and grab that. So, the rules in the Olympics are a little different. So adding a veteran presence like JaVale McGee, as funny as that is, I really think that he could be a good addition to them. And here's where it gets interesting. You ready? Let's say JaVale McGee gets a gold medal this year, right? And he's got 3 rings. Could JaVale McGee be a Hall of Famer?
Oh my God!
Just tossing it out.
Stop talking.
His resume of backpacking is pretty good. I will say that he's been jumping on a lot of players' bags, and I think Team USA is going to be fine. They're going to win the gold medal. You saw what they did to Argentina, who's a really solid national team, and they won by 28. At the end of the day, these stars are going to come up. They were not playing together long for those 2 losses. When those other teams, they were playing together for months. So I think give it a few weeks. I think this team will be just fine. And you just look at the star power. Also, I don't know if they're still going to be on the team, but Devin Booker, Chris Middleton, and Drew Holiday are also on the roster, probably coming. Obviously, they're playing in the finals right now. But yeah, those guys too, to already the KDs and Lillard, and just you can go down the list. This team will be just fine. They definitely have enough star power to win gold in Tokyo.
Yeah, when it comes to JaVale and it comes to Keldon Johnson from this, first of all, I got to be honest, I'm not the biggest NBA guy, so I can't say I was exactly watching a lot of Keldon Johnson tape. But as far as JaVale, look, I think look. It's kind of strange because obviously everyone knows him Shaq and a Fool and all that stuff. Obviously getting hate on by the TNT crew and all that. So of course, it's kind of funny. I think he's a decent player. Obviously, he was part of those Golden State teams. He won a championship with the Lakers in the bubble. Roche, we were talking about those 3 titles. But it's very funny to me. And honestly, it's a little – think about the history of the USA men's basketball. Obviously for years and years, it was college players. But then, of course, starting off with the 92 Dream Team. We go from guys like Jordan and Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and Patrick Ewing. And then we have this next generation of LeBron and Kobe and Kyrie was on the team and stuff like that. Tim Duncan, stuff like that. And now it's we're playing with JaVale McGee. Like, what are we doing over here? And I think, look, they'll win. Obviously, also JaVale probably not even going to be the starter. I mean, Bam Adebayo is probably going to be starting, obviously. I mean, who knows how much JaVale is going to play? They obviously needed some center help on the team anyway. But like, you got KD. You know, he Devin Booker is going to be on the team eventually. Probably Jason Tatum. We can see what he can do. But it's a little like disheartening to like know that like we don't have like we have a good team every year, but it's not like I don't know. It's just weird that JaVale McGee's on the team. They're probably gonna win the gold, yes, but I will say though, I'm not as like, oh, it's okay that they lost those exhibition games. I feel like that I have to admit I was a little concerned as well. Now they did have that blowout win against Argentina. But we do not need a repeat of the 2004 like bronze medal. And I mean, if that happened again, I mean, that would just be we do not need a repeat of that.
Yeah, I mean, the reality of this year's Olympics is we haven't had the playoffs we wanted because of injuries, and that's because of a short off season, and there were more back-to-backs this year than ever before. And a lot of guys are banged up, a lot of guys are hurt, and this is the first time in a while that you've really got that off season to rest. So I don't blame a lot of guys for not being on the team. And yeah, you're going to end up with JaVale McGee on your team, but he's better than 99% of other basketball players. So personally, I'm not concerned with it.
Yeah, he's still playing in the NBA. I mean, you got to give him that. I mean, a lot of guys on these other teams aren't, but like, I mean, yes, you're not going to see history. You're not going to see Jordan and Magic. You're not going to see Kobe and LeBron on the same team, which is obviously was like, you're just watching history. I don't think this team's going to be that, but I don't think this team, is bad. I think they're going to win gold. I think it probably will be pretty easy. And like it usually is. And I don't know, I'll see it when I believe it. If this team loses, I don't think a 2004, repeat will happen. I honestly think this is still, KD, Dame, and we're just talking about Dame, he'd be the best player on the Knicks since Patrick Ewing, and he's on this team. So like, I mean, that definitely, you put guys like that on together, obviously, what Kevin Durant can do, Jason Tatum, who I think is butting into, Jack, I know you like this, but he's butting into obviously one of the best stars in the league. So like, they'll have enough to win.
Yeah. All right. Well, and for our final NBA headline, it seems like every show I'm on, I talk about the tournament for some reason. I always end up going on one-on-one right when there's like play and tournament talk. But to kind of elaborate more, for our last headline, it appears that the NBA play and tournament is here to stay, at least for one more year. It was reported by ESPN Friday afternoon that the NBA and NBA PA had agreed to continue the play and tournament for the 2021-2022 season. The tournament, as constituted the last 2 years, involves the 7 through 10 seeds in each conference battling for the final 2 playoff spots in the East and the West. So, guys, your thoughts on the play-in tournament staying around? Good thing, bad thing, excited for it? Andrew, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, the play-in tournament, like, I think it's good for the league because I think what it did, it gave those, like, 6 seeds or, like, it gave that more of a worth, which usually those teams like sit their starters or whatever, like the 5 seed kind of that similar area. And I think it just made more meaningful games, which is great to see. I think the NBA is always going to do the play-in tournament just because it makes money. I mean, you saw the Golden State game, where Steph went off, obviously didn't win, but when you go into games against the Lakers, like that game, was like the most watched NBA game, like up to that point or something. So like those types of games, like that's a lot of money in the NBA's pocket when you have a chance to do that. And I think, you definitely get more meaningful games, which is obviously great to see. The only problem is, I mean, I can barely remember when the playing tournament was going on. I think it was going on in like May, and we haven't finished. It's July 17th. Like that's the only problem. It's very long. These playoffs are like 2 months. Like I know that, you look at other sports, football's only 1 month really. Baseball's really only October, a little into November, but like to have really NBA and NHL, it's like way too long. I mean, this year, I think it's been good because you've had some parity and you have some, good games, but it's July. Those games happened in May. It's just at a certain point, it's too long.
Yeah, personally, I'm a fan of it because I think if you're a team kind of in that like 4 to 8 mix, it incentivizes you to, not, be in that 6 through 10 slot. And also if you're a bottom feeder and you're close to that 9-10 seed, you don't go full tank mode at the end of the season. So I think it just is a little extra spark for kind of the competitiveness at the end of the regular season where things kind of tend to get a little bit dull. So personally, I'm a fan of it. Do I think the NBA playoffs are too long? Maybe, but I'm not afraid of a couple extra games.
I mean, I'll just say about the tournament briefly. I'm a fan of it as well. I think it creates a little bit more excitement. We saw I thought that Lakers-Warriors game was great. I mean, at the time, it was the highest rated, game of the season up until that point. So also, I think, it's pretty good in terms of shaking things up, with flipping some seeds. It creates a little more excitement that way. My one problem with the tournament, though, is, and you guys kind of talked about it a little bit, is like too many teams make the playoffs now. And now you're getting 10 teams essentially in each conference making the playoffs. That's 2/3. I mean, the NBA regular season was already meaningless as it was, but now it's even more meaningless. It's hard to kind of really get invested in regular season games when so many teams are going to make the playoffs. But overall, I think it's pretty good for the league and, it's exciting to watch. And I guess we'll see what happens going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, like just the NBA, like if you're going to have 2 months playoffs, you probably have to shorten it up a little bit, like just the regular season. But I think it does incentivize a little more meaningful games for those middle seasons, Jack, you were saying that 4 through 8, which I think does matter. I mean, I think it also matters like how close these teams are. Like in the East, like when everything was, really, really close, it's a lot, it's a lot easier to maybe, when you have your 4th seed could chop all the way down to your 7th seed, like that will make it obviously more parity. But I guess that will matter year by year, but definitely a really interesting concept. And I think it does make the game better, though. I do think that adding more games and, you get to see like the Steph LeBron game where, it was a great game, but definitely I think it will be continuing for a while. Thanks as always, Mike, for the headlines. Always really fun. Next, Jack and I will sit down with writer and editor who's worked for a lot of different publications, from the Daily News to the Queen's Ledger to the Wave, Matt Caputo. We're going to talk Islanders, NBA Finals, and a lot more. You are listening to One on One on 90.7 FM.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Back into One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Jack Roche, and we're joined by writer and editor Matt Caputo. He's worked with Slam, the Daily News, Men's Fitness, the Queen's Ledger, just to name a few. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing pretty good. Andrew Gullotta, huh? Wow.
Yeah.
Low blow, huh? I guess you don't get the reference. Do you know that Andrew Gullotta was a big heavyweight in the 90s?
I didn't. Really?
Yeah, absolutely. He's a Polish guy.
Wow.
He's a Polish guy from Chicago, and he famously got disqualified not once but twice against Riddick Bowe from Brooklyn, and he was known as a notorious fouler. But
really?
He was a very tough heavyweight in his time. Same spelling of your name and everything, the exact same everything.
Wow, you don't get that a lot because it's
not
like
I don't know how nobody told you this.
Yeah, no one told me this. I guess boxing is, I don't know.
It's a little out of your realm, huh?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, that's really interesting, though. I mean, I do want to start off, obviously, not with fighting and that stuff, but there's a fighting component, and that's the hockey. Okay. And I want to talk about the Stanley Cup, obviously just ending. The Islanders coming so close to a Stanley Cup appearance, obviously losing 1-0 in that Game 7 loss to the Lightning in the conference finals. And, you saw the Lightning take care of the Canadiens pretty easily in 5 games, and it looks like they had a nice handle of that series. So I wanted to ask, how big of a what if is this season for the Islanders, just the way it was ending and how the Stanley Cup went and just how close they were, and then to see the Lightning just, take care of the Canadiens handedly, it must for the Islanders hurt.
Well, it's a good question. I think that the biggest what if for Islander fans probably had to do with what if Tampa Bay had been penalized for circumventing the salary cap. But listen, I've been following sports and hockey my whole life, and I think no matter what it is, whether it's the NBA, the major leagues, the Yankees were great at it for years. As the playoffs go on, the team that looks like the deeper team is going to win. This is almost a given all the time, especially in hockey. The Lightning were really deep. There were a lot of vets out there. There were a lot of super talented younger guys. You had the changing of the guard very much in the goaltending position, basically between the two teams in Carey Price and Vasilevsky. You also had Stamkos, at 100%. It was a great run by the Islanders. We are a very tough team. If you're an Islander fan, that's what you say, but Tampa Bay was just really talented. I mean, look at some of these guys on their roster, experienced guys like Blake Coleman that stepped up and different guys coming up at different times. This happens all the time. You look at that St. Louis team, very deep team. You forget St. Louis a few years ago had not only Maroon, but they had at the very end of the bench, I think it was Del Zotto, all these guys just kind of black aces waiting in the wings. So I think Tampa Bay, it wasn't a huge shock to me, but listen, different set of circumstances. Obviously, the Islanders probably had a different shot. Yeah.
We're coming up on the NHL expansion draft with the Seattle Kraken being introduced to the league. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on how this is going to affect a team like the Islanders and what kind of tough decisions they're going to have to make on protecting players.
Well, I think they're already trying to get something in return for the guys that they might leave exposed. I think the biggest guy would be Nick Leddy, maybe. And I think on the New Jersey Devils side, people were talking about it 2 years ago. It would be PK Subban if he's exposed in the draft. So listen, everybody's going to lose somebody. The Islanders are a hot target right now. I don't know if it came up beforehand, but I did get to take a look at the new arena at Belmont Park a few weeks ago. And I think that this is a game changer, especially if you're a mainstream sports fan. Let's say you're a fan of the teams that play at Madison Square Garden, or you're a fan of the Yankees. You're going to finally see that the Islanders are going to be on all of those teams' levels. As a matter of fact, they're going to have a nicer place than most of those teams now. It's not going to be what it was in the past, that the Islanders were kind of in a second-rate arena and not an option for free agents. Listen, Long Island loves hockey. You saw it the last few years. People who hadn't cared about the team in 30 years are trying to tell you that they were there the whole time, which is a lie. I think that, listen, you guys are probably, I'm going to age myself here. You guys are probably even too young to remember when the Islanders wore those crazy jerseys with the fishermen's on the front. I was in junior high. It was the hardest time to be an Islanders fan ever. Literally, the abuse in and out of school was not fun. But they persevered and they came through. And I always said, not just as an Islander fan, but as a fan of hockey and a fan of the NHL at times, if the Islanders ever got it going again, there'd be big trouble for all the other teams. The Devils still have a lot of people that kind of consider themselves New York fans. The Rangers, I think that the Rangers are inaccessible to some people. And the Islanders have kind of always been this open door, come to the game, please. you know? And now it's totally turned in a sense. This arena is going to be a game changer. I know they were talking about the big guy from St. Louis. I think his name is Tarashenko from St. Louis. You know, I think he's talking about being open to being traded to the Islanders. This didn't happen even 10 years ago. You know, the Islanders had to resort to, you know, middle of the road and fringe free agents for years. It's gonna be a change for sure.
Yeah, as someone who grown up on Long Island, lived really close to the Coliseum, definitely one of those things where you could just you could go see an Islanders game. It was always really fun. And I wanted to ask you about, you know, that change and also a lot of changes over on the roster, just because, you know, you talked about the Lightning salary cap and there, you know, they should have got penalized, didn't. The Islanders have their own salary cap situation. So with all the changes coming into this offseason for the Islanders between the arena and then also personnel as well, what's one thing that really sticks out to you? Is it the arena, just because that changes everything, being maybe a little more accessible to the city and, you know, for people to just take the train out? Would that be something that just larger fan base, maybe it generates more money, which then in turn could, you know, invest into the team?
Well, I'll be 100% honest with you, Andrew. I think that the biggest difference maker right now for the New York Islanders is Lou Lamoriello. Yeah. Simply put, I think that that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest advantage that the Islanders haven't had in the past. It's that kind of steady management, experienced management. I'm going to tell you guys a very quick story. I heard through the grapevine I could be honest. I mean, I'll be 100% honest with you guys. I'm not out at the practice of the Islanders or the Knicks or the Nets or any of those teams, but through being a beer league hockey player, I do get to know sometimes team employees and people like this, and I do hear things that come down the grapevine. So one thing that came down the grapevine, which I thought was great because it did show that not only was somebody was in charge that wasn't just going to accept any arbitrary decision. So when the Islanders switched over to their new practice facility, which was built by two former Rangers, I don't know if you guys know that, Chris and Peter Ferraro, the Ferraro twins. Their family, if you guys know Montauk at all, their family owns Plaza Sports in Montauk. It's a surf shop. I think they changed the name now, but they had that store there for maybe 50 years, 60 years. But long story short, the rink was built and quickly problems began. Long story short, it ended up as property of the Islanders. The Islanders took over what is now Northwell Health and Ice Center. Now, this place was built by two former NHL players that still, you know, could probably be playing somewhere. And there's, you know, those guys are probably only in their early 40s. So, point being, Lou Lamoriello comes in. He's now in charge of the Islanders, and he completely changes everything except where the two rinks are in the building. He changed everything. The locker room situation, the workout types of equipment they had in the workout room. When you have this type of organization in anything, you might not always get the best results, but you are going to be able to keep going and keep a well-oiled machine, which is going to help you focus on the results. So I think that that's the biggest advantage. Listen, if the Islanders lose players now during this period, I'm not saying that it couldn't all fall apart. That's the reality of sports. It could fall apart. But they have Lou Lamoriello. I'm sure he has a plan. I don't think they're in danger right this second of losing Barzal or Anders Lee or anybody like that. So, listen, it's not the guys that are expendable, but there's options out there.
You mentioned those beer league hockey connections, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about the Mustache Classic. I was able to read up a bit on that, but just for our audience, I was hoping you could expand on that a little bit.
Sure. Thank you for asking, Jack. I started the Mustache Classic with a group of guys. It was kind of a mix of a group of guys that we all kind of knew each other from either playing hockey or never really met, but kind of know each other through the internet and of beer league hockey internet, you know. So I had a group of guys that I was playing with for a long time, over a year, and I had always wanted to do something for the Movember Foundation, right, which is about growing mustaches to recognize men's health and mental health awareness. Um, I never really thought I would get it off the ground, to be 100% honest with you guys. Listen, we're looking at the calendar for it right now. It takes a lot of work to put this stuff on, especially if you're going to get people interested in coming. But we started the Mustache Classic thinking, let's get a group of guys who are going to go up to Danbury, Connecticut. I don't know if you guys know about Danbury. It's a great town to see hockey in. They have like a minor league hockey team and a junior hockey team. And so let's go up there. Let's rent the rink in the morning, go to lunch at TK's in Danbury. They got great wings, and hang out at Charter Oak Brewery, where the service is great. The beers are great too. And we just kind of thought we were going to make a little thing out of it. And the next thing you know, the first year we raised about, I don't even remember, like close to $7,000 or something like that. You know what I mean? But like the impact, I got to be honest, I never thought I was going to get out of it what I did. The impact was just unbelievable. You know, a lot of guys came forward saying that they had connections to suicide or connections to cancer. I mean, one guy, gentleman who lives in Astoria, I mean, it's really kind of changed the guy's life in some ways. And he's been, and we linked up with a couple of different groups. So it's kind of my guys from the city, a bunch of guys from Staten Island who were kind of mixed in with my guys, and then a bunch of guys that I know from Connecticut and all over. So we put the word out on the internet, and the first year we just did like a quick little game and had like 30 people come. We raised like $7,000. I was asked by Movember to go to ring NASDAQ's bell, which was really cool. That was awesome. But the best thing is that we established it that first year. And then this year, I mean, we just kind of, these guys that got involved, you know, it really has nothing to do with me after a while. So many people have connections to mental health and suicide, and not to downplay it at all, but it's one of those things where I just kind of lay the framework to the best of my ability. And this year we raised over $20,000. So we went from $7,000 to like $20,000, and it really was one of the best things I ever did. I could tell you two fellas that you guys seem like younger guys, you know, but it's like, if you can do something like this that's a little bigger than you, you never know what kind of positivity comes back. I'll be honest with you, I was kind of down and out, not sure what I was going to do with myself at the point that I started it. And the truth is that corny stuff that they tell you about building your resume is true. You know, do something with a charity, you know, and ultimately I got the most reward, a lot of personal gratification out of it, because we had so many people, a guy by the name of Mark Weiss from Staten Island, and a guy by the name of Rick Ziegler from Connecticut, a guy by the name of Brian Stedman from Brooklyn. It was really more of a thank you from me personally to them, and a way to be like, you know what, you guys do so much week in, week out for beer league hockey, and so many guys get an escape, and so many guys you talk to in the parking lot, they're going through stuff, but they're having the time of their lives out there. So, you know, it's a good thing. I hope to keep it going for a few more years at the very least, but it is a lot of work, and it does take money. So the biggest thing is that you know, a lot of people, you can go back and forth on where you get the money to do one of these things. I got most of the money from a company called Champion Elevator that was really, they really felt that this was something important. And it wasn't even about getting their name out there, really. I mean, they wanted some involvement with it, but it was really mostly, hey, what could we do to make this a reality? So without Champion Elevator and a few other generous people, we wouldn't be where we are today.
So that's really an awesome story. And I do, before we let you go, I want to move it over to the NBA Finals. And this has been, to me, a great series, back and forth, Suns and Bucks, and different. I love that it's different. It's not the Warriors and the Cavs. It's not LeBron and Curry. And I just wanted to ask you, either coming into the series or just now that we're, in the midst of it, what's kind of one thing that's really surprised you about these two teams here, as, we're really now getting towards the end of the series and some big games ahead?
Well, I think that what really has surprised me is the kind of the fight back of the Bucks here. They were up 2-0, right? And I think when you have a group of guys that are as motivated as this Suns team is now, from the GM, James Jones, on down, Chris Paul is a very competitive player. And don't get it twisted, guys. I'm sure you guys have played some ball, but as you get further into being a professional athlete, just from what I have observed, it's a very intense thing to still want to win as bad as Chris Paul does. I mean, he has everything. I'll tell you guys a quick story. When I was probably I don't know how old you guys are, but I was probably around your age. I interviewed Chris Paul for Vibe magazine about bowling, just about bowling. And he really wanted me to know that there was no way that Darren Williams could beat him in bowling. And at that time, there was this weird, which, nobody thinks about it that way anymore. There was this weird comparison between Darren Williams and Chris Paul, who was the best point guard that was new in the NBA that time. And there was a moment where Darren Williams was right there. And, Chris was like, D. Will knows I'll beat him. And so he's a very competitive guy. And when you're getting this close, I think that's the difference maker for Phoenix. Is some people are down. Phoenix is a great sports town. When Dan Marley and Charles Barkley were playing for the Suns, they owned that town. Marley, you guys probably don't remember Marley. Marley had a bar across the street from the Suns, like while they were going to the playoffs. You know what I mean? Like it was Dan Marley's. So that's a city. I hate to wear my heart on my sleeve here, but I would like to see Phoenix do something here, just because it's another fan base, and Milwaukee as well. It's just another fan base that this is really their winter sport. You know what I mean? And this is what the people in town follow really loyally. So it would be great to see who comes out on top in this one. Listen, Milwaukee Bucks fans are just as loyal. I mean, there's a lot of ties to I don't know if you guys know, there's a lot of ties to New York City basketball, history of New York City basketball. Those two teams. You had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right, in his early days for the Milwaukee Bucks, and then you had a guy who you guys probably never heard of by the name of Connie Hawkins, the Hawk. And Connie Hawkins eventually played for the Phoenix Suns, but he had kind of a controversy plagued prep career, and he kind of took the long route there, and he was kind of old by the time that he got to the Suns. But you're talking about two great NBA franchises finally getting a chance, and I think it's the most fun when two teams that either haven't won or haven't won in a while are in it, because I think we saw that with St. Louis a few years ago, and Dallas was in the Stanley Cup Finals a couple of years ago. So it's just when those were, even Montreal recently in the Stanley Cup Finals, they hadn't been there in a long time. So when that happens, sports is at its best because somebody really wants somebody to win.
A writer and editor who's worked with Slam, the Daily News, and much more, Matt Caputo. Thank you for joining us, Matt.
Thank you for having me, guys. It was a real pleasure. Tell Bobby C that here in the Wave office, we all call him Bobby Casanova.
Sounds good. We'll be right back on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show.
sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
We're back here on One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. I am Michael Leegan, and once again, I have the latest headlines from the world of sports. So we have a lot of NFL headlines to get to, but let's start off with the news coming out of Tampa this week. It was reported by the Tampa Bay Times on Friday that Bucs quarterback Tom Brady played the entirety of last season with a torn MCL. The 7-time Super Bowl champion initially suffered the injury during his final season with the Patriots, and it only got worse as the 2020 season progressed. So, guys, I think another notch. I mean, I know I'm not a big fan of Tom Brady myself, but another notch in the GOAT resume. Andrew, I know you probably have a lot to talk about this as a Saints fan. Let's hear your thoughts.
I mean, look, I don't like when it's not even just Brady. Like, I don't want to because even when it happened, Brady did the exact same thing. It came out, he had 5 different injuries and whatever. If you're on the field and you're playing and you're not on the injury report, you obviously were good enough to play. And I know Brady, good for him. And he got the Super Bowl. I'm not taking away his credit, but to me, it doesn't really add any extra credit, just for any other player that has an injury and it comes out 2 months later that he played through it. If it was that bad, then he wouldn't have been playing and, whatever, or he would at least been on the injury report. So that's just kind of my takeaways from it. I mean, Brady, even in those Saints games, I think that a lot of people were talking about the defense was the main star. Against the Saints, it was. They were outstanding, and they had 3 interceptions on Breeze, 4 turnovers, and that was throughout. Their front seven was absolutely dominant, and Brady did what he needed to do to get done. That's why, he's Tom Brady, and that's why he's always hoisting up those Lombardi trophies. You got to give him credit for that. He made the big throws throughout the whole entire playoffs. When there needed to be a big throw made, he did make them. So you give him the credit where credit's due, but I'm not giving him any more credit because he played with a torn MCL that we heard 4 months after the season. If it was that bad, he would have at least been on the injury report. And that's something that, look, I'll give him the credit. As I said, I'm not losing sleep over that playoff loss anymore, but this doesn't add anything extra for Tom Brady in my book.
Yeah, and the fact that he wasn't on the injury report actually could have some ramifications for the Bucs because failing to disclose certain – no, I'm serious. Failing to disclose certain injuries, they fine you for that. Teams have gotten fined hundreds of thousands of dollars for stuff like that. Now, let's put that aside for a second. Let's just talk about what this means for his legacy, right? Former teammate Rob Ninkovich, he spoke to Tom Brady's toughness, but he goes, an MCL injury, playing through that isn't crazy. Every football player, has played through some sort of injury, and MCL, at the end of the day, isn't one of the worst injuries you could have. Now, something that guys don't do is win Super Bowls at age 43. So the fact that he did something that no one's done at that age mixed with an injury. I mean, yeah, other guys play hurt, but man, it's just what can this guy not do? I know you hate to hear that, Leegan, but that's just my perspective on it.
I mean, in terms of my relationship with Tom, I mean, obviously he was one of my most hated athletes when he was with New England. And then I have to admit, as much as I hate him with the Patriots, I was rooting for him a little bit in the playoffs there because, frankly, the only person I hate more than Tom Brady is Bill Belichick. So to see Belichick get a rise out of him, even though he, probably denies it all, but obviously to me, when Belichick went on that huge spending spree in free agency, which he never does, to me, that was a sign of, I need to prove that I can win without Tom Brady, just like he just proved that he can win without me. So I do admit I got a little enjoyment out of that, but going more to this story about the torn MCL, I mean, look, I think obviously you guys are right. The fact that he wasn't on the injury report. I mean, I in my mind, I can't go back. I mean, I remember when it was with the Patriots, he would always be on the injury report, and those were like Fugazi injuries. I don't know if like was Brady ever listed as like, questionable with like a sore knee or something. I don't know, maybe, but the point is that I think it's still impressive. He still went out there and played every day, but I can't deny that. Like, I understand it's not exactly a torn ACL or something like that or a blown Achilles, but you hear the news that a guy who was 43 years old tore his MCL and played through it the entire season. Not only played through it the entire season, but went through a whole offseason workouts, training with the guys. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Tom Brady, but I have to admit I am personally impressed somewhat by that feat. But the question that I have for you guys following up on that is, I think it was Buccaneers owner or general manager. I don't remember off the top of my head, but when he was asked about this injury, he said, Tom wasn't even playing at 100%. So now that he has surgery, I don't even know what he's going to do for the league. Now he's a year older now, but do you think that, and the whole team, remember, Tampa Bay was like one of the first teams ever to actually retain their entire starting offense and defense after a Super Bowl season. So my question is it possible that this team could be even better? Are they Super Bowl contenders again? What do you guys think?
I mean, they're Super Bowl contenders just because they somehow brought back their entire team. That probably has a lot to do with Brady. And I think just like I think Brady, because he's done it before with the Patriots, it's like the mantra, like, okay, if my quarterback's taking the discount, maybe we all should. And obviously Brady doesn't have a lot of years left. So, if you can bring it back for one more year or whatever it may be, they're definitely going to be and they should be, as much as, like they're the Saints division rivals and they're going to be picked to win the division. They're going to be picked to probably, I don't know if everyone's going to pick them to repeat, but I think people are going to pick them to go far in the playoffs, and rightfully so. I mean, you give them credit where credit's due for sure. I mean, is Brady going to be much better because he's not playing injured? I'm expecting probably the similar Brady from last year. He's 43. I bet something else or however old he is, and going to be 44, like however it's going to be, like there will be something that comes up. Like that's what happens when you get older with Breeze. Like I just remember it was the last 2 years of his career, it was always something. And I bet it'll be something with Brady. I think he'll play through it, and I bet he'll be probably, as good or around as good. I don't think he's going to fall off a cliff. But I look, they're going to be there, and we'll see how the season plays out. But I think right now, if you didn't put him in that conversation, I think that would be the more thing, like the questionable thing.
Yeah, I mean, we say this every year, but in 2 weeks, Tom Brady's going to be 44 years old, and I understand maybe that specific injury he was dealing with last season, he'll be stronger there, but it's going to be something else. You hit that right on the nail. It's tough to stay healthy at that age.
Yeah, I would say with Brady and stuff with next season. Look, Tom couldn't move when he had a healthy MCL, so I mean, I don't necessarily know.
It's not like he's the most mobile guy in the world.
Yeah, as Mike Francesa said about Eli Manning, he's as mobile as a tree. So I mean, I don't really see having this great repaired MCL, really helping Tom out that much. But look, I still think Tampa Bay is going to be a really good team. Are they going to win the Super Bowl? Are they going to win the NFC Championship? Way too early to tell. I always like to see a team that coming off a title improve. I think they kind of maintain the status quo. Now, obviously, it was good enough last year. Is it good enough this year? Who knows? But, I definitely think it's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens moving forward here with Tampa Bay and with Brady. But there's some more NFL headlines to get to and a little more kind of serious topics. So in other football news, it was revealed by the Associated Press that 2 NFL teams remain under the 50% threshold for COVID-19 vaccinations. On the flip side, there are actually 13 teams with a vaccination rate of 85% or more. Washington and Indianapolis have the lowest vaccination rates, while Pittsburgh, Miami, Carolina, and Denver have the highest. On a related note, the NFL also told the AP they do not plan on canceling any games this year. So to me, taking that all into account, it seems that teams with few vaccinated players could really be at a disadvantage. So, Andrew, what do you think about this vaccination news? Any thoughts on potential negative consequences if the league should implement some kind of mandate? What do you think?
I think the NFL is going to play every game this season. I don't think what we saw last year, I don't think they probably postponing games is probably, if it's going to be maybe a postponing, like maybe it'll be like a Monday to like a Monday night, but I don't think the NFL is going to do what they did last year and really blow up the schedule because of COVID. And when the NFL wants to do something, they do it. And I think we saw that last year, when we saw the Broncos play without a quarterback, like they're going to do what they got to do to play the games. And teams that, if they're more apt to get an outbreak because they're not vaccinated, that's going to obviously put them at a disadvantage. And that's something that I think the teams at the top and the teams that are winning are going to, be in the playoffs trying to win a Super Bowl. I think that you want to do anything in your best, interest to get to that point. And, I think this was also something last season about staying healthy and doing all that stuff and following the protocols, because I think that when you only have one chance to win a title, or you're in a 2-year window, like everything counts. And, by just following the Saints over the last few years, it's so hard to win a championship that you don't want to make something off the field that issue. So I think that's what that's going to be the big of the NFL. Like if you're not going to, hit that, the vaccines and you're at more risk to get a breakout, I think that the NFL is really not going to care at this point, which is something that, look, they're going to do what they got to do. And that's what, as I said, that's what the NFL does. And I think for teams that want to go in and win a championship, they obviously have to, put this into importance.
Yeah, I would say, in terms of the vaccination rate, I mean, even putting the fact aside that, people should get vaccinated just because it's best for their own health and best for the health of the community, taking aside the fact they're football players, they should just get vaccinated because it's the right thing to do and it's the right thing for themselves. But looking at it from a football point of view, I mean, if you're a team that's committed to winning and you want to put a winning team on the field, if you're a team that's a contender that you think you have a shot at a title, why are you going to run that risk of, oh no, like exactly. My guy has COVID, he's going to be on the COVID IL, now we're down a man, our quarterbacks in the IL are starting corners. Like, plus, I mean, if you remember from last year, I'm thinking about the Denver situation that happened with the quarterback because, obviously, the vaccine wasn't out by that point. So all of the Denver quarterbacks had to go into quarantine because they had all been in that room together, all in the QB room together, studying film. So you had to put a practice squad wide receiver who had played quarterback in college out there. It was a complete mess. I mean, if you're a team with low vaccination rates and you have a bunch of your quarterbacks who aren't vaccinated in a room, guess what? The game's not going to be canceled and they're going to be gone. And you're going to be, that's a game you can throw out. So I don't understand why, even from a just like moral and health point of view, if you're a team that wants to win, why wouldn't you tell your players to get vaccinated? Now I understand, legally they can't like force someone to get vaccinated. I mean, I don't think legally they can. Maybe as a business they can. Obviously the PA, they have the rules too. I know all the sports, associations, players associations are, fighting back on mandatory vaccination as a player's right issue. That's a whole other can of worms. But the simple point of the matter, point of fact is that, I'm even thinking about the Jets and Giants over here. Like you got the Jets, rookie quarterback, new organization, bunch of young players. You're trying to build chemistry. I mean, what's going to happen if there's a COVID outbreak and these guys who are trying to learn how to play with each other can't get together? And I mean, I've also, I was reading a little bit more about some stuff. Remember last year, and I don't know, I'm not in NFL, headquarters. I don't, training facilities. I don't know if this is being enforced, but, there was rules like if players weren't allowed to have lunch with each other, they had to sit at their own separate tables. And, there was very regimented, the players really couldn't interact with their own teammates. And I was reading that the NFL said, if you're vaccinated, it's back to normal. Basically, you can, hang out with your friends on the team, whatever. But if you're not vaccinated, you're sitting by yourself at lunch. So all those rigid protocols are still in place. So from a team chemistry point of view, from a winning point of view, it makes, and obviously from a health point of view, it just makes so much sense to get vaccinated. I don't understand why teams and players are being so hesitant.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like fans aren't going to realize the impact of this until, their favorite player sideline or their fantasy star isn't playing that week. And, maybe like it seems like a no-brainer, but there's a lot of teams that need to reach that threshold, and it's been available for a while. So I hope that we can have a smooth NFL season. It was a pain last year. No one wants to see what happened to the Bears happen again, or the situation with the quarterbacks.
Broncos.
It was the Broncos.
It was against the Saints. I mean, I guess I'll take the free win, but
anyone besides Andrew, one wants to see that besides Andrew. So, I just want to see a normal season. I think everyone wants to see a normal.
I think the NFL wants to see a normal season. Like, I don't think they're like, I think they want to see fans in the seats. Like, you could bring it up on a financial point too, like that they want to put that, the revenue back up so the cap goes up. I know a lot of teams have been feeling the brunt of that. And, if you can, obviously, if you can get past the pandemic as quickly as possible, the NFL is going to want to happen. And when the NFL wants something to happen, they do it. And that's what I think they're going to do in this situation. And they're not going to, maybe a Broncos situation would happen again. And, I don't think the NFL is really going to care.
Yeah. I mean, I would say also, we're being reminded with baseball right now that, I think a lot of us are feeling like, hey, we're vaccinated, we're getting back to normal, but we have to just take a step back and remember that, the virus is still out there. And, it's been great, to be vaccinated and to kind of get more of a normal life back. But, you look at a team like the Phillies, they remind us that like COVID is still affecting teams. I mean, I know the Yankees locally, but the Yankees are in a weird spot where like a lot of players were vaccinated, but are still testing positive. So I want to put them aside for a second, but looking at the Phillies, they're one of those few teams in baseball that still has a below that threshold vaccination rate. And they've been kind of decimated by COVID stuff, having guys go on the COVID IL and all that. So, and the Phillies are on a not playoff push because we're still at the halfway point, but they're right there for the NL East. And, if you want to try to win the division title, you're going to need your guys. So again, it's just reiterating that point of putting the health stuff aside. If you want to put a winning product on the field and you want to ensure that your, best players are out there, get vaccinated. And I know with the Yankees, obviously, they've been very unlucky in the fact that they've had vaccinations and players have still tested positive for COVID. But that being said, I mean, just hear from Phil Nevins, what happened with him. He got COVID, but he was vaccinated, and his doctors told him that had it not been for the vaccine, that the virus would have spread to his lungs. It could have been a lot worse. So even if these players get COVID despite being vaccinated, maybe that turnaround time for being sick is quicker. They're healthier. All the Yankee players I know have no symptoms apparently. So, at the end of the day, players, everyone, I think it's best to get vaccinated personally. But, we have more headlines to get to. One last headline that's kind of very close to my heart has to do with the Jets. And so earlier this week, Jets safety Marcus Maye failed to get a long-term contract done with the team prior to the franchise tag deadline. According to Ian Rappaport, negotiations actually went south weeks ago when the Jets offered Maye a deal with an annual value 20% below the franchise tag amount. So, and apparently things were so bad in negotiation between Maye and the Jets that Maye's team actually pulled their counteroffer off the table prior to the deadline. So obviously this is more of a local story. It's not more of a national NFL headline, but I do think there's some interesting things to talk about here with like the idea of franchise tags and how much leverage it gives a team. So, Jack, we'll start with you. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the Jets kind of negotiation tactics here, because it seems like Joe Douglas is also getting a reputation for being a little stingy, or if you have any thoughts on the, general franchise tag, instrument.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the Jets better than me, but I think we can take this situation and see how the team is able to lowball a guy, and then they have all the control with the franchise tag. I mean, I think we see this happen every year, and it really is a broken system. I don't really think it's going away. I don't know how it would go away. And I don't know, you can just keep on tagging guys until, guys get hurt and you're not stuck with that long-term commitment. So it's really tough, and teams hold all the power. So I don't know exactly what you can do about it, but it's not a great system for the players.
Yeah, and the only thing I will say about the franchise tag, it goes up. Like if you get the franchise tag 2 years in a row, it goes up like 25% or something like that. I think it's 20%, which for teams that if you're up against the salary cap, like that's probably not something you want to do for a 1-year cap commitment, because it could get pretty pricey, especially for a position like safety that, it's not always the highest paid position. And right now I think it's 10 million around for May, I believe, or something right around there. But if 20% higher than that, then you get into areas where maybe you just rather get the long-term deal. I mean, I know that the Saints are going through a similar situation with Marcus Williams, who's very similar to Marcus Maye, both drafted in 2017, both safeties, free safeties, both drafted in the second round, both played really well last season. And I think with Maye, he's a guy that, when you look at the Jets defense last year, is probably the only bright spot. And, he played well in a bad defense, didn't really say much, stood out of the limelight. You don't really hear much about him, which may be a good thing. And, he's kind of now maybe going to be the leader of this defense, and you franchise tag and you can't get the long-term deal done. Yeah, you get to see now another year of him, but what if he goes out and does really well again? You're probably not going to franchise tag him 2 years in a row, and he hits the open market and you can't keep him because of that. So you play that gamble really either way. And, I guess that's what the franchise tag does. I mean, look, those cap hits get very, very high, for the tag. I know at least for the Saints, like it definitely forced them because they tagged Marcus Williams. They couldn't get other guys. Like that was just kind of the trade-off. So, it is definitely, I think, an interesting scenario. I think it's not for every team. I think then some teams do it a lot. And I think by position, it matters more too. I think safety, because it's a little cheaper. The tag's a little cheaper. You may be more likely to do a safety compared to a corner where it's higher. It is like a very odd, like just, thing for the NFL that they have. But when you look at the negotiations between the NFLPA and, the owners, it's one of those things where it may be just best give it, just that's one thing that stays. And if other things change, like, the revenue share and that type of stuff. So I think it's staying, especially when, you see other things changing. But I don't think it's all bad. I think it just depends on the situation of the players and the teams.
Yeah, I mean, first off, looking at it from a Jets point of view, I mean, first off, last year, obviously, or, you had the whole Jamal Adams saga, and
that too.
He wanted a new contract. And, Jamal and Marcus, first of all, Jamal's a strong safety, Marcus is a free safety, so a little different position value. But also, Jamal went about it very differently, where he made it very public. He started bashing the organization publicly, go to Manish Mehta, the Daily News, doing all that kind of garbage. Whereas Marcus Maye has been a very stand-up guy, very reserved. I mean, his agent has made some comments publicly. He hasn't said anything. So, two very different guys, but it seems, Douglas, with Joe Douglas, and just doing it from a Jets kind of, take real quick, it seems like it's making it obvious that he doesn't really value the safety position a whole lot. He's not going to overpay at safety, regardless of if you're a guy that plays in the box or you're playing in coverage. And, with Marcus, he's 28, soon to be 30 enough. I think it's just a matter of the fact that he was kind of here at the wrong time. He was a guy who played on some really bad teams. It seems to be the organization is turning around with Robert Saleh and Zach Wilson and Elijah Moore and bringing in a bunch of new guys and draftees and all this stuff. So, I love what Joe Douglas has done. I love his draft so far. I love the guys that he's brought in. I love Saleh being here. I'm not going to knock him necessarily for realizing that he has leverage in the fact that he can just franchise tag him this year and next year. And it's a safety position. It's not something that's like you're going to overpay for, so I'm not going to sit here and be one of those guys that's just like, oh, Joe Douglas this, Joe Douglas that. I mean, if they start losing, maybe I'll, well, they already have been losing, but if the turnaround doesn't work, maybe I will. But I'm not really super passionate either way. I like Marcus. I think he deserves some money. That being said, I get where the Jets are coming from. I'm not going to be someone who's also going to label Joe Douglas as this like stingy negotiator. But as far as the franchise tag itself, I think that it's interesting. I mean, in baseball, you have the qualifying offer, which is like kind of like the franchise tag, but you don't have to sign it, and then they get a compensation pick. I mean, maybe that would be a more beneficial thing for both sides in the NFL. I don't think that will ever happen, but maybe that would be better for the players. I think about like Earl Thomas when like his whole thing and they ended up getting hurt on the tag and all that. Football is a sport where things can change in an instant like that. Careers can end in an instant. So, I feel bad for players when they don't have that long-term security, but they're also getting paid the highest level for a year. It's a very interesting, touchy subject, but I don't know if you guys have any final thoughts on the topic before we wrap it up over here.
Just to come full circle, we started off with Brady and, we say, well, everyone's dealing with injuries, and that's the reality of the NFL. Everyone's injured all the time, and you're not playing on fully guaranteed contracts. I always sympathize for the players. I always take their sides, and I just think that more often than not, it harms the players long-term.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something where it's like, do you want the money up front or, obviously you want the long-term deals. So it's like, yeah, you get paid like a top 5 safety or a top 5, whatever, for a year. And then if you play well, like you're going to hit the big contract. I remember Kirk Cousins, he played well in the tag year and then he got overpaid. So like, I mean, I feel like he's a guy that just plays well in contract years, and he did it again this year. But, maybe it just, you could see it's like just a 1-year contract that, it's like that you get the high money, but, you don't get the years. And that's something that, look, for some guys it works, some guys it doesn't. And like, that's just kind of the franchise tag is. And then the players, and then the teams have to deal with the high cap hits, which I know like for the Jets, it may not matter because, they have a lot of space, but for a team like the Saints, like the extra $5 million, where if you had the extension, you can extend it, and then the first year cap it's very, very small, and then it gets bigger throughout the contract. Like for a team like the Saints or a team like the Bucks, it mattered a lot. Like, and then the Bucks were able to re-sign their guys long term, and maybe that's how they were able to bring their whole roster back. Like stuff like that, I think does matter. But it's definitely something that it's one of those quirks about the NFL that's really very unique to that sport. But I do think that'll wrap up our NFL headlines. Thanks to Mike, as always, for giving us this headline segment, both headline segments for this show. Next, Jack and I will come back, talk about the NBA Finals. That will definitely be very fun. But first, we're going to take a quick break. You are listening to One on One on 90.7 FM.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org. One on One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Jack Roche. And now, Jack, let's get into some NBA Finals talk. And I think the series, back and forth series, and you just saw the run, you have a run from the Suns in the beginning of the series. Bucks, they battle back into the series, and to me, I just really have enjoyed it because, you obviously get the different stars in the NBA Finals. As I said, in the Open, it's not LeBron, it's not Curry. You get Chris Paul, which is one of my favorite NBA players, just because to get him finally in the finals. And I think, a lot of people are going to talk about his legacy, which we'll get into. You have Giannis, who this is the first time he gets his superstar status in the finals, which is something that's big on when he got that big contract. And obviously the rest of what the Bucks with Middleton and Drew Holiday, I know their legacies and what they're thought as players will change immensely. It depends if they win the series or not. And, the Suns, you could say the same about Devin Booker and, what they're doing, their depth. But I just think it's been such a fun series to watch these two teams battle, and a lot of adjustments made on both sides, which is why this series is really knotted up.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to legacies of players, I think the two names that jump out, obviously are Giannis and Chris Paul. And I feel like we're almost overlooking Devin Booker, Imagine if he gets a ring at his age. I mean, you can have the debate on which player is, more important to this team, which player is better for the Suns. But Devin Booker has been in Phoenix for a few years now. And, it's hard to not call it his team. So, I mean, if he's the guy, maybe not the guy, one of two guys, and he's got a ring, I mean, he's one of the brightest young stars in the league.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with just Devin Booker. I think he has the it factor when it comes to the playoffs, where he can get a bucket, when, you need him to do that. And I think that's something that not every guy can do. And it's something that if he wins a championship, that's going to add, I think, to the way he's able to play in the playoffs. And if he can win it, it almost, maybe it's even more impressive. But when Kawhi won that championship and he was the MVP of the finals, when obviously Duncan was still there and, Tony Parker with the Spurs, it's almost like, yeah, he's young and, he's not the superstar apex, but he's one of the best two players. And that's something that I think would add to him for sure. And I agree. I think it's his team. I think that as much as I love Chris Paul, Chris Paul just came this year. I think obviously Chris Paul is the reason that they're in the finals. But I think that, Devin Booker, he is, without him, they're not at the finals either. So I think you need both guys, but he's the guy that's going to get the bucket when you need him most. And he's shown up in this series. He's played very well. And he's a guy that I think one of the most young stars in the league. And maybe you're starting to see the baton pass over between maybe the older stars, obviously maybe like the Chris Pauls and the LeBrons. And, you could talk about it for a long time with these new age, the Tatums, the Bookers. And I think that, if the Suns can, complete and win the series, that does a lot for Devin Booker.
Yeah. A big reason why they're here right now is the emergence of DeAndre Ayton.
That too.
He was the first pick a couple years ago. And he's really broken out in these playoffs. And, you take a look at their ages. Devin Booker's only 2 years older than DeAndre Ayton, which is crazy. I can't wrap my head around that because it seems like Devin Booker's been in Phoenix, for a good chunk of time, but he's only 24 years old. It's crazy to think. I really think the league's in great hands. We got Tatum's 23, Booker's 24. I think Luka is 22, and not sidetracking the finals too much, but man, we're really seeing these young players take the league by storm. And Giannis, another guy who seems like he's been around forever. He's 26 years old, already has 2 MVPs under his belt, defensive player of the year. And if he gets a ring, we got to start thinking about where he's going to go down as an all-time player.
Yeah, it's like where he's going to go down in the league. If he won one championship, but he's only 26. So how many more is he going to win? I think it's interesting conversation for both of these teams. If they're, winning a finals, can they win multiple? Can they be sustainable for multiple years? I think for both these teams, yes, they're kind of, it's their first years in the finals in a very long time. And the Suns have never won a championship. The Bucks, I think the last time they won it was in the 70s or 80s. So obviously a long time coming for both these teams, but is it sustainable for both of them? Especially, I think a team maybe like the Suns, where it's kind of like you're bringing Chris Paul, and are you on the up and up, or is this kind of just like a 1 year thing? I think that's also an interesting conversation because I think these two teams, as much as it's been great to see, will we see the return of the Nets? Are they going to win a championship with the Lakers? And that's something that for either, if it's Booker, if it's Chris Paul, if it's Giannis, is this going to be, you're in the finals, how many more times are you going to get back? Is this going to be one of your, only chances in it? I think that's something that's interesting.
Yeah. The league just changes so much year in, year out. We're not too far moved from Chris Paul and James Harden almost making the finals appearance, and then you've got the Oklahoma City detour in between there. We've got, I know he tore his ACL, but Kawhi Leonard's going to be a free agent. We don't know where he's going to end up. And, the guy we've been talking about, Chris Paul, declines his player option. He's due for another payday. I don't know where he's going to end up. He's getting up there in age. So, who's going to give him that big money? Is he going to end up staying in Phoenix? It's, the league just changes so much every year.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I think Chris Paul, especially, I think it depends how this series really, ends out for him. Played so well in the beginning, and Drew Holiday kind of, combats him, plays much better in the, with the Bucks winning a few games, and that's something that I think Chris Paul, he's probably going to be the key to the series. Also, Devin Booker, I think, but if Devin Booker, I'm pretty confident that he'll continue to make big shots. It's, if Chris Paul, can he bounce back? And I think that's something that probably will, determine, obviously next year and what he's going to get in free agency, but I think, his legacy as a whole, and if he can, win that championship, I think, he's a guy that, to me, I think he's, when you look at our generation of, I call it almost like LeBron generation where, the 2005, last 15 years, I think he's probably the best point guard, regardless if he wins this championship or doesn't. But it starts to be what is he going to be known maybe in the league next year? Is he going to be such a hot commodity if, they don't win the championship and he's not able to finish the deal?
Yeah. you got to think about like where Chris Paul is going to rank in terms of those all-time point guards. You know, I mean, he's not better than Oscar Robertson, right?
No, yeah.
But let's say he gets a ring this year. How far away is he from a guy like Isaiah Thomas?
I think he's obviously, Isaiah Thomas won, I think, 2 titles. Did he?
Two titles.
Is Chris Paul? So it's like different because they're just different generations and different types of point guards as well. Everyone talks about those bad boy Piston teams. It's like, I think if he wins this, I think he's right there. And I think Chris Paul is also, I think he's been better for a longer period of time. Now that also may have to do with just, I think, the way the NBA is played now. And that's, but I think you have to put it into really wherever Chris Paul's went. It started off with the Hornets in New Orleans, which they were still called the Hornets. And he was making the playoffs with basically nothing. And I mean, you can't really name, I forgot who was playing with him down low, but I remember that, he made a few playoff appearances. I think he was the captain on the team, really good. Then he goes to LA. It was that whole situation with him and Blake Griffin, the pick and roll, the dunks, DeAndre Jordan. They were really solid. They were on the doorstep of a championship. Goes to the Houston. They're on the doorstep of a championship. And I mean, who knows how his legacy would have changed if they would have beat the Warriors and they get into the finals and he plays that game 7. I think that changes things a lot. Then he goes to Oklahoma City. Everyone thought, he's done. He's now going to Oklahoma City just to finish out his career. It gives them to the playoffs and then, is able to then go obviously this year. And like wherever he goes, he wins. Like that's something that has to be put into consideration, especially if it's over a 15-year period, could now be longer. Like what if he plays a few more years, continues to make the playoffs? And if he has a championship, like that changes a lot.
Yeah. And this is really the series that allows him to rewrite that, Joker narrative.
Yeah.
You throw out the Clippers team that he was on, and they blew that 3-1 lead they had. That was a 3-1 lead before the Warriors blew one.
Yeah.
And it's just tough because in Game 4 they had a really good opportunity to close that one out, and Chris Paul some costly turnovers down the stretch, and you couldn't contain Giannis there. So I'm hoping for a Game 7. I know it's going to be a tight rest of the series, but if they end up losing this series, that game
to be
remembered.
Well, I think if they would have went up 3-1, we were just talking about how they blow a 3-1 lead, but I think they win the series. If they go up 3-1, and I think pretty handedly. But that's how series change that quickly, and you wouldn't think it would be your vet point guard that has been playing so well up to that point, and in that the first 2 games of the series before the Western Conference Finals, and I think a lot of people didn't think he would turn the ball over, especially in those pivotal points, but he did. And then you talk about it, like what is this, put it in quotes, but the choker, kind of designation. And when you talk about legacies and like an NBA, guys, Twitter analysts, whatever, everyone loves to talk about legacies. And as much as Chris Paul is great, and like I like, to me, it's not going to change to me what type of player he is if he wins this title. But all of a sudden, if he wins it, it's like it moves him so much up. It's like, for me, it's like, as much as it's Chris Paul's titles, it's also Devin Booker's title. And it's like just a team thing, especially this Suns team where you just have a really good team and they mesh well together. It's hard to put like, oh, it was one guy that got him there. I just don't think that was the situation. And I know people will probably play it like that if they win. And even if the same thing with the Bucks, if people are going to play it like it was Giannis and that's it. But like, to me, it's like, it's always a team, and it's not like it's LeBron carrying the Cavs. Like that was a little different to like the finals. Even when he won, Kyrie was there. I mean, he was making big shots. I know people I think people remember what Kyrie did, but everyone talks about LeBron brought back the title when Kyrie in those last 3 games of that 3-1, coming back from 3-1, he was just as good, scoring 40 points and hitting big threes and Steph Curry, Klay Thompson's face.
Yeah. And I completely understand how much the league has changed, not just loyalty, but how we view championships. And I really do still think it is that important for a player's individual resume to get that ring. And I understand that it's a team accomplishment, but when you're that driving force on the team, which both Devin Booker and Chris Paul are, if you want to have that resume, best player in the league, or, when you go down to the all-time talk, you need that ring. And, a guy like Carmelo Anthony, he doesn't have the ring. He's not going to be, in those all-time talks, regardless of his individual accomplishments. So you really do need that ring to, I guess, elevate yourself in the all-time discussions.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think if Giannis gets it, I think it means a lot to him, because it's not like he left and got the ring. He got the ring when he was the main guy, and they built around him. I think a lot of people, they almost put like rings into, like, they say some rings are good, some rings are bad. Like KD, his rings, everyone says, do they count? I mean, when he won them in Golden State, like Dame Lillard, like he's trying, if he's going to leave Portland, I think a lot of people would think, well, is it for his legacy so he can go win a title? I mean, is it James Harden? Is it because he went to Brooklyn because he wanted to win a title, and like that's why he wanted out of Houston? Like, is that something that, is that why the league changes so much and why players leave so much? Is it because everyone's like, well, I got to win a title to be known as a top 5 player at my position, or a top 10 player, or a top 15 player? Like that's something that I think is interesting when talking about the NBA, because I think when they talk about guys' legacy, they think championships. So championships mean everything, and then you look at KD, they're like, oh, those don't count. Like he's just ring chasing. It's such an interesting dynamic.
I think fans have short memory, though, and
that's true.
KD's different because he's like, I think he's the best player in the world right now, and he's a guy that's very vocal on social media. It's easy to hate on him, right? But I feel like we're not that far removed from, the Anthony Davis situation where, he wanted out and it got ugly and he ends up in LA and now he's a champion. You can't call him a loser. You can't call him putting up empty numbers on a bad team because he's got a ring. He did it, and I think maybe there were some of those criticisms for, a young Kevin Garnett, and then he gets traded to Boston, and he's a champ. So I think you just got to get the ring, and some are harder earned than others, but ultimately you just got to check the box. You got to get one to be in those discussions.
I think Anthony Davis, he's almost a little different, I think, but like
totally.
Yeah, he's also younger. It's like, it's a situation where, and like New Orleans, I don't think they were gonna, they had their chances to try to win around him, and they brought in like DeMarcus Cousins and like, whatever they were doing there. I don't think he would have probably had a best chance to win if he went to the Lakers with LeBron. And it's like, you bring up the scenario with Harden, where, did he just go to Brooklyn, or if he went to the Sixers or whatever it may be, is he just leaving to ring chase? Does that ring count if he's the third? Like, that's the whole thing with the NBA. It's so like, I think people think about especially with big threes. I think that's the biggest thing with these super teams. It's like, which ones. I think that's why with Giannis, this one, I think people will mean so much to, I think, the city of Milwaukee. And then obviously I think his legacy, because it's his team. He did it by himself. And that's something that, like, if Dame Lillard, if he stood in Portland and they got like a Drew Holiday and a Chris Middleton and they won the championship, that would be, mean a lot to Dame Lillard. And like, as I said before, when we were talking about Dame, it's like, if your team can bring you the other stars and you win, then that's like, you're the king of the team, or you leave and you got to get as you said, check the box somewhere else. And that's, I think, kind of what the NBA is almost turned into.
Yeah. The NBA legacies sometimes aren't always, the fair, it's not always the fairest assessment, but I still think you got to get the ring. And, maybe a homegrown guy, that means more than, James Harden forcing a trade.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I do think that'll wrap up our NBA final segment. Always fun to talk legacies with you, Jack. But next, to finish off the show, Mike will join us to talk all things MLB predictions here in the second half. It'll definitely be really fun going over the trade deadline and what the stretch run will look like, playoffs will look like. Definitely will be a lot of fun. But first, we are going to take a quick break. You are listening to One on One on 90.7 FM.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Back here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Jack Roche and Michael Leegan. And guys, let's get into some baseball talk and some bold predictions as we're heading into the second half here of the season. And the second half, you got the trade deadline, you got the stretch run, and obviously the playoffs. It's definitely, I think that this year will be a lot of fun, especially with the Mets in it. For me, it's always a lot more fun, when you're going down the stretch. And I feel like when the Mets are good, they always hit their best stretch in like August. And, I guess that's 2015, 2016. Those really the only times the Mets have been good in my lifetime. So I guess I'm a little biased, but I do want to start off with the trade deadline. And I think that this one will definitely be very interesting. You have a lot of teams. I think just how the MLB shook out this year, you have a lot of teams at the very top. And, you kind of have some teams like that are 500 or below 500, but they can't even get the wild card because the second wild card is like 15 games over 500, which I think you'll have a lot of buyers and, you'll have sellers like the Cubs where they have a lot of great pieces and they're going to be trying to sell them to, try to get as much possible. But Jack, I'll start off with you. Any trade deadline bold predictions here?
I think the A's are going to be uncharacteristic buyers. I think that they usually don't do that, but I think we could see them make a move for a guy like Nelson Cruz, 1 year, but really could make a lot of impact on that offense. I think that they're really scratching the surface on being a really good team. They're not going to, get past the Astros, but I definitely see them, slotted as a wild card contender. So, I definitely like to see them beat buyers. That's one of my predictions.
Yeah, so for my prediction, my bold prediction, I'm going to keep it local. I'm going to go with the Mets here, of course, because why not? And now, obviously, earlier in the show, we're going to we talked about Chris Bryant, and the Mets, and I'm going to predict it's going to happen, but that's not the only. But I think that's a little like vanilla. I think a lot of people are talking about it. So my bold prediction for the Mets is not only will they trade for Chris Bryant, they will trade for Trevor Story, and he will become the second baseman for the New York Mets for the second half of the season. And Jeff McNeil will be gone at that point of the season as well. So I don't know if you guys remember, but during the home run derby, Buster Olney was on the mic, and he was like, "Oh, here's Trevor Story. The Mets and Yankees could be looking at him as a trade." Now that was kind of like a passing comment, but it got me thinking, got me excited. And you throw in the fact that number one, Lindor, obviously, we don't really know the extent of the injury at this current time as we're doing this show. But let's say it's serious. I mean, you could get Story, still play him at short, let him walk. Or what I love to see is you trade for Trevor Story, you put him at second base. Now, look, I don't really think there's any love lost between Jeff McNeil and Francisco Lindor. I saw them laughing a little bit together last night in Pittsburgh, but I don't really think they like each other that much. And we know Lindor is going to be here for 10 years. McNeil, he's a little bit older for given the time he came up because he'd been in the minors for a minute. Having a down year this year, I think that this is Lindor's team. I could honestly think, and we also got to remember, this is Steve Cohen. Steve Cohen likes to make it. I think, his offseason was nice. It was very good. Obviously, Lindor was the big piece. And then like VR and Pilar and, bringing in some other guys like Loop in the bullpen and stuff. Like it was Carrasco. And the starting obviously isn't pitched yet, but it was a good offseason. But I think in classic Mets, I think there's still a little bit of the old Mets in this team. And that means a big trade deadline acquisition. So I think Chris Bryant is, I don't want to jinx, I'm a huge jinx too. So I say this and none of this will happen, but I'll just go with it for the show. So I'm going to say Chris Bryant and Trevor Story both come to the Mets. Trevor Story will be the second baseman for the rest of the season, and let's see what happens. But that's my bold trade prediction for the Mets for right now.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think the Mets, I don't think they're getting Trevor Story. I do think they'll add multiple pieces. I don't think they're just going to get, let's say it's Chris Bryant. I think it'll be Chris Bryant plus like two other players. Like, I think that the Mets are usually active at the trade deadline. Sandy Alderson's still running the show there. I mean, I think that's one thing that people, especially now he's got money to play with Steve Cohen. I think it's going to be a very, impactful, eventful trade deadline for the Mets. I agree with you. I think that Chris Bryant's a little like, I don't want to call it vanilla, but like a lot of people are calling it, but I think they'll probably add a starting pitcher and a reliever. I think that's something with the Mets, especially with, Miguel Castro has been really shaky of late, to add someone else. Yeah. If they can add someone that's been, more like almost like a Tyler Clippard. I know he, in the playoffs, he wasn't that good for the Mets, but like just someone like that, especially when you have a Diaz, you have other pieces like May, I would like to see that. But my bold prediction is that NL West teams, they're going to make big splashes here. You have three teams that are very, very good. You can call them all World Series contenders, and they're all in the same division, and two of them are going to play in the wild card game. I think whoever it may be, one's going to make a big splash. I think it's going to be the Padres, and they're going to add Jose Barrios to that rotation. And I think they got the prospects. I know they've been trading a lot. Blake Snell hasn't been that good, a 4.99 ERA. So he was obviously their big addition. Hasn't worked out the way they expected so far. But you had Darvish, Barrios. You're hoping Snell turns it around. I think the Padres, they're always that team. They're always like that sneaky, new young team to make a move. They did last year with Mike Clevenger, who's now out this year. I think they do it again with Barrios.
Well, that's the problem. Like, why are you acquiring? I understand that helps you this year, but if you really do have Mike Clevenger coming back,
that's a stacked rotation. I don't think they're gonna, because Snell right now, you look at his contract, it's very team friendly. Darvish, he's going to get paid. Obviously, you have Barrios, you have team control for him. Clevenger, you have team control. It's a lot of guys where you can stack up that rotation, and you can beat the Dodgers. I think that's the number one thing for the Padres. Like, they really want to beat the Dodgers very badly. I think a lot of teams, a lot of fans, probably other teams around the league want to see that happen, just to see the change of guard. I think the Padres will do anything to do it, and I think Barrios would be that move.
Well, with the Bauer situation, you think Dodgers are?
Well, that's something too. I can see. I think Barrios is going out west. I don't know. Like, I can see the Dodgers. Dodgers probably will make a move because they're the Dodgers, especially as you said with the Bauer situation. It'll be interesting if they would add a guy like that. Yeah, I could see, but one of those two teams, because just like you don't want to play in that wild card, especially when you look at you've played them so much, whether it's the Giants, Padres, or Dodgers. Like, you've played each other 20 times. Now you're going to play again just one more time for a chance to play in a series. Like, you want to make sure you're not in that game, and I think one of these teams will try to up the ante there.
Yeah, I think also, and I'm curious to see what you guys think of these other trades that I'm kind of thinking about or I've read about. Number one, Andrew, for you, what if for the Mets we got a package deal? You want that bullpen arm. What if we got Chris Bryant and Craig Kimbrell? Now, Kimbrell, I don't know what you would do with him with Diaz, but I think that'd be interesting. Also, Kimbrell, I mean, had a really bad year last year, turned around this year, but he's also a guy that relies on the sticky substances, so I don't really know. And then for Roche, you and your Red Sox, what if he goes back where it all started, Anthony Rizzo to the Red Sox? I read about that in some other places that reported that maybe that's a possibility. So I don't know if any of you guys have a potential thought in either of those possible trades.
Andrew, you want to go first?
Like Kimbrell, I think Kimbrell's going to the Red Sox, to be honest with you, in a little flip. Like I think the Mets may make a package move. I think a lot of people were saying if the Mets would go after Barrios, it would be Barrios and Donaldson. Like, maybe that would be something. Like, if the Mets can't get Bryant, I think the Mets will get a third baseman. I think that's the one place where you can add a really impact player, and that could change your team. I guess same with center field, but Nimmo's been so good, you're going to not take him out. And the bullpen, I just think it's not going to be that Kimbrell. I don't think it's going to be that closer. I think the Mets like Diaz. I love Diaz. I'm going to stick with him until the end. With the trumpets, I'm going until the end to Diaz. I'll go with him. If he falls off the cliff, I'll fall off with him. Like, I'm with him. Kimbrell, I think, though, the Red Sox, I think, especially when their team that, like a lot of people, like they've been so good, and not that many people talk about how they were obviously in last place last year, and they quickly turned that around. Everyone thought they just traded Mookie Betts, they're done, and then they just went out and they showed up everybody like this. Like you look at Chaim Bloom, he knows what he's talking about, and they've just been so good. I could see Rizzo Kimbrel for them. Like I don't know, I think they may make a splash because when you do it earlier than expected, I think you're like, okay, we can do this, and they're just so they're so good right now. I mean, you never know.
All right, let me give you my thoughts on the two guys, Rizzo and Kimbrel. The reason why Kimbrel isn't on the team right now is because they didn't want to pay him. And a big reason why they've been able to turn the script from last year to this year is because of their all-star closer, Matt Barnes. And I
just signed, though, a very, very pretty light contract if you look at his extension that he just signed.
Yeah, 2-year, team-friendly deal. I'm a fan of Matt Barnes. He's been great for us all season. And would it be great to have, another guy like Craig Kimbrel? Absolutely. But you're going to be giving up prospects to get a guy that you had at one point that you didn't want to pay. Now, he's not just a rental because he's got a couple more years on his deal.
Yes.
So you're going to be giving up serious assets. Whereas a guy like Rizzo, who's a free agent at the end of the season, started off in the Sox organization, and they kind of need a dependable first baseman, which – Rizzo's not having his best season, but I do think that the Sox locker room would really benefit from, some veteran leadership, which is exactly what Rizzo brings you. So I would love to bring Rizzo back, and I'm not against bringing Craig Kimbrel back, but it just doesn't fit into what they've been doing the past few years.
My question about Kimbrel and the Red Sox, and, I think we've seen this with Kimbrel before, where he's a little bit of he can get the yips from time to time. He loses control, especially now with the substance stuff. I think a lot of things for him are mental. So my question is with Kimbrel, if he were to go back to the Red Sox, is, he not only was it the money, but he was not pitching well towards the end of his time there. I mean, Jack, you know it better than anyone. When you guys won that last World Series, like he was not on top of his game. So, when you have a guy who, is one of those pitchers that can like kind of get in his own head from time to time, do you really want to put him back in a situation where it was obvious that the mental side of things was affecting him? Maybe he's at the smartest move to get a guy that didn't necessarily, he had good moments for sure, but also some towards the second half, not so great moments. So that would be my kind of question with that. I wonder if maybe, even though maybe it makes sense to add that kind of open arm if he's the guy, given the fact that it didn't necessarily end well the last time.
Yeah, man. Watching him on that 2018 run, that took years off my life. In Boston, we called him Cardiac Craig because, I gave you a
Try watching Familia for 5 years, and then you could come back to me watching Jerry's Familia.
It's so frustrating because Kimbrel really, I don't think there's any closer that has better stuff than him, maybe with the exception of Chapman, but they've been neck and neck for their whole career.
He's got his own issues.
He's got his own issues, but Craig Kimbrel's on top of his game right now, but man, he's got great stuff. I just don't know if that's with the Sox. It'd be great to have him, but man, just thinking about that gets me anxious.
Yeah, it'll definitely be something that I think the Red Sox, I could see them adding a big piece because, when you're I feel like the Red Sox, they always go from last to first. That's the biggest Red Sox thing. And for them to be good again, you got to give Chaim Bloom a lot of credit. I'll never forget when the Mets were in on him and he supposedly he wanted to go to the Mets. And that was a rumor. And then the Mets were we don't want to blow everything up. And then they got Brody instead. That's still a what if in my mind. Maybe that was the reason that, Steve Cohen came to the Mets because of just how, atrocious the Brody Van Wagenen experiment went. But that always sticks in the back of my mind because he's a really good GM and he knows how to build the team. And I think we're seeing that now. But I do want to move over past the trade deadline. I want to talk about second half MVPs. And I think a lot of people, they go to Shohei Ohtani in the first half and the home runs, the pitching, doing both. And a lot of people, he almost stole the show. People are talking about, is he the face of baseball now? But I want to ask if there's any second half MVP that maybe will take it away from him. Mike, I'll start off with you. If you feel like one guy is going to really turn it on.
It won't be Francisco Lindor, I'll tell you that. But obviously different leagues, but you know what I'm saying. But the point is, honestly, before the season started, I don't remember I think you were on the show with me, actually. We did a show before the baseball season even started, and we did predictions for the whole season. And at the time, I predicted Mike Trout for MVP, for the actual MVP award, because it was an easy, safe bet, whatever. And obviously now he's hurt and he's not playing, etc. I know you said someone other than Shohei, but before I throw out another name, I do think Shohei Ohtani, honestly, if he continues what he's doing, first of all, it's unprecedented. I haven't seen it in 100 years. He will be the American League MVP. I don't think there's any doubt about it. But if you think about players who, in either league, who can maybe have a big second half and kind of turn things around for their team. Look, I can't help but think about the Yankees right now, and I can't help but think about, if they're at an inflection point. We talked about this earlier in the show. What are they going to do from here? How can they get things going? How can they turn things around? And, people talk about Judge, who's out on the COVID IL right now, but honestly, I'm not saying he's going to be the second half MVP, but the simple fact is if the Yankees want to be a playoff team, if they want to be a contender, he has to play like one, and that's DJ LeMahieu. And I think like DJ LeMahieu played like an MVP the last 2 seasons. He's been that guy who the Yankees have been able to rely on, and he's been okay this year. He's been fine, but he hasn't been the machine that he's been in the previous season. So if the Yankees are going to make the playoffs, and I'll just go straight out bold. I'll go like this. If the Yankees make the playoffs, the reason they did it is because DJ LeMahieu was the second half MVP for the team. That's how I look at it.
I like that. He wasn't even a guy that was on my radar. So I like that pick. And I definitely agree with you that if Shohei Ohtani stays the course, he's the MVP. There's no question about it. As good as Vlad Jr. has been. So here's how I look at it for the rest of the season. I think the only thing getting in the way of Shohei is injuries, which he's been plagued with for his whole career. So it wouldn't be shocking if, he missed time. So, let's look at Vlad Jr. Well, in a couple weeks, they're going back to Toronto. He's playing in a whole different stadium. So, that's also, I understand it's not like the end of the world, but it's just a new variable, that's introduced. And when I try and think of consistency, guys that have been consistent, not just, this season, but for their whole career, I may be a bit biased, but I think that, a guy like Xander Bogaerts, I think that he's modeled for consistency. So, he's been swinging a hot bat this year, started shortstop in the All-Star game. And I think right now for Vegas, he's the third favorite for AL MVP. So, you've got 2 really bright young stars, but when you think of a guy that's done it for a long time, I can't think of a better one than Xander Bogaerts.
Yeah, you talk about what the Red Sox have done. Like them giving up Mookie, and obviously Mookie hasn't had the best season this year, but like to be able to lean on Bogaerts and JD Martinez, and to have those guys, they're just raking. So it's like I guess it's they knew those 2 guys were definitely those all-star type guys. And I think that you got to just give him a lot of credit. Bogaerts is just such a good shortstop. You almost think like, that's why I thought the Mets were getting in Lindor, and just obviously the first half, it hasn't happened yet. But like for me, Vlad Jr., he's got 2 legs of the Triple Crown right now. And like, no one really talks about that, but he's leading an average RBI. He's very well could end up the leader in home runs. Like, that's just something that I don't think a lot of, like, if you have Shohei, even if Shohei keeps this up, are you going to keep, a guy that got the Triple Crown away from the MVP? Like, that would be really, really tough. Like, if you have both of those guys playing at the top of their game, like, he's just such a great hitter, and obviously it ties to Vlad Guerrero Sr. and all that stuff. And that's always fun to see. And he's playing better than his dad right now, which is, really, really hard. And how can I not name Jacob deGrom, who is really 1.08 ERA? He's right now could have the best season of any pitcher. And, when you have the best season in pitching history, I think you got to be in the conversation for MVP. We'll see if he can keep it up. I think that's something that's going to be very interesting, especially because, you go back to the Bob Gibsons and like when his seasons and, just all those great seasons, they usually happen because they pitched so many innings and the ERA was low, because you can give up a run and your ERA wouldn't go up a ton just because you pitched more innings. DeGrom only going 6 and 7. That may be a little harder because a run means a lot more if you're pitching less innings, but I got to side with Jacob deGrom because, he's just been so dominant, best pitcher in the game. And if he keeps this up, and if that ERA maybe can go a little lower than 1.08, which I know is hard to say, but it was lower, and it kind of creeped up a little bit towards the All-Star break. But he's a guy that if he's sub 1, he's got to be the MVP.
Yeah, I would say, well, first off, I want to clarify. I don't think DJ LeMahieu will ever actually win the MVP.
I know, but you're saying like he's.
I'm saying like he will play like one in the second half if they win.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to, just to clarify. But in terms of literally winning an MVP award, Andrew, I got to go with you. In terms of Jacob deGrom, I don't think it's close. I mean, who else in the NL is literally willing their team the way deGrom is? Now, my only concern is because also when we think about deGrom, everyone talks about Ohtani. I know it's kind of tongue in cheek, but I mean deGrom, when he goes in, he pitches, he drives in a few runs, like he's doing it at bat too. I know it's not every day like Ohtani, but it's not to the extent either. But you can't deny the impact it's had on both sides. Obviously he's a better pitcher, but look, I think it's deGrom. I don't think it's even close. But that being said, my biggest concern about deGrom in terms of an MVP odd, or honestly just helping the Mets in general, is that the injuries. And I understand, so far everything's been clean. He's been very overly cautious with his body. If he feels anything slightly, he goes out, they do a test, and it's been clean so far. But the simple fact is he's still missed time. He's still been out a little bit. You could tell that he hasn't been super comfortable all the time out there on the mound. I mean, the great thing about deGrom is even when he's having a bad start, it's still a good start for most other pitchers. But I do think when it comes to a pitcher, they tend to be it's an uphill battle to win an MVP because you're only going out there every fifth day and all that stuff. So, I think he has the inside track. I think it can probably win it. If he continues to do what he's doing, he will win it, I think. That'll just further cement his legacy. If he can be an MVP winner and a Cy Young winner in the same year, that'd be insane. But another name to throw out there, I think also, and this is a little bit for my own benefit, is before the season started, I mentioned Tatis, and I said, I think that he could be the NL MVP. And honestly, I think if you're not going to go with deGrom, I think he's right up there. Now, has he had an amazing season, like average wise? Probably not, but he's got the power. His defense is a little suspect at times, but look, the simple fact is the Padres are now one of the top teams in the league, and he's at the center of it. And when you think about it, when you think about the award, I don't. To me, MVP shouldn't be who is necessarily the best player. A lot of times it is. I think with deGrom, not only is he the most valuable, but he is the best. But with Tatis, he's honestly San Diego's most valuable player. There's a reason why everyone was holding their breath when he had that shoulder injury earlier in the season. And to me, all of the success, whether it's the vibes in the locker room, everything that San Diego's having, stems from Tatis. So to me, if it isn't deGrom, if deGrom ends up kind of falling to injuries in the second half, or it just isn't, it's obviously tougher for a pitcher. I think Tatis Jr. Could be the NL MVP.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that I don't know. deGrom, I mean, let's see him on the field a little bit more. He's had those nagging injuries, and it's terrible. It sucks, right? But man, are those just going to go away? Like, is he going to start this week? Is he going to keep on, being that guy? And if he, stays the course, he's the MVP. But I just think Tatis is a little bit safer of a pick right here, right now. And in terms of a more like dark horse off the radar type guy, I think that Juan Soto is due for a big second half. He had comments that a lot of guys are worried about the home run derby ruining their swing, but for him, he's hitting the ball on the ground too much and maybe elevating the ball more through that swing that, you get into in a groove in the home run derby might help him out. And listen, I think that he might be the best pure hitter in the league. His approach is unparalleled. His plate discipline, you just don't see that out of guys that young. So he hasn't had that next step in his career. Like, I think this year he was expected to do the things that Tatis is doing and Shohei and Vlad. And I still think he's right there with those guys. And, I do think that this second half we could see some, close to MVP talks for him.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I do want to say about deGrom, you said he needs to be on the field more. The one thing I will say is that this guy never pitches in like national televised games, and like he didn't pitch in the All-Star game. And I think people almost don't give him enough. Like, people don't see him enough. Like, that's the thing. I feel like whenever the Mets are on, they get like Corey Oswalt started the game. I don't know why, but it's always like that's the case. He doesn't pitch in the All-Star game. I feel like there's so much hype towards Ohtani and all these guys. I don't think deGrom gets enough of it. And look, I'll start the petition right now. We need deGrom on nationally televised games more, just because he deserves it. And I think the team, he's not hyped enough. I mean, the guy's having a 1.08 ERA, and like it's kind of just like, okay, he's good, move on. Like, that's almost like I feel like how it is with him. So that's the last thing I do want to say about that. And I before we wrap up, I want to get to the final standings predictions and bowl predictions, as I definitely want to get into this because I have a few, not only for final standings, but also going into the playoffs. But first, Mike, I'll start off with you. Mm-hmm. What's your final standings predictions? Any bold playoff predictions for teams right now?
Well, first, before I get to that, I want to comment real quick on what you just said about the national televised games. Yes, DeGrom needs more attention, but do we need, as Mets fans, more A-Rod telling us about the Mets? I don't need that, so I'm fine with it.
You got to sync up the radio and the
exactly. We were talking before the show about how I had to do that, not for national televised, just because Anthony Recker is terrible at his job. But that's not the point. The point is with the predictions for the playoffs. I'll just throw out a couple, and I'm sure you guys will have thoughts on the other divisions, etc. But for me, first off, NL West, I think the Giants are going to win the division. I never would have thought that coming in, but the simple fact is they were the first team to 50 wins. They have been on fire. The fact that they're doing it with guys that many of us thought were over the hill or kind of washed up. I mean, thinking about like they got Wilmer Flores over there contributing to the team. I mean, I got to give them props. Gabe Kapler, I mean, did you really think that he was ever going to be a good manager after what happened in Philly? I never saw that happening. And to be honest, I think he could be manager of the year. So, I mean, what San Francisco is doing, I mean, who knows if they can sustain it for the rest of the season, but I'm just going to be bold. I'm going to say they're going to win the division. I like what they're doing. I think they have good energy, good chemistry. They've played well against the other teams in the division. I like to see them winning the West. And I've said it earlier in the show. I'll say it again. 2 NL wildcards are going to be San Diego and Los Angeles. I think if you're another National League team in the Central or the East, you got to win the division to get in. And I do think I'll go even further. The Los Angeles Dodgers, who are the defending World Series champions, they will be eliminated in the wild card game, and San Diego is going to move on. So you're defending 2020 World Series champions, who also, I hate the Dodgers. That's a side point. They're going to be out of the first, it's going to be a 1-game playoff. They're going to be gone. So that's my prediction for the NL. And real briefly for the AL, I have to do it. I'm sorry, Yankee fans. Well, not really, because this actually gives me great joy. I do not think the Yankees are going to make the playoffs this year. Now that, because I said that, Yankee fans should probably be happy because now they're going to, because I jinx everything. But I don't think the Yankees are going to make the playoffs. I mean, you look at it, I think the Red Sox are just way too ahead in the East. And then we look at the wild card standings. I mean, you got Seattle's in front of them, Toronto's in front of them. I mean, I just don't see it where the Yankees can really make up ground. I don't think that they're better. I mean, Tampa Bay and Oakland have the 2 wildcard spots right now. I don't see any of those 4 teams I just mentioned really falling behind and the Yankees really catching up. I just don't see the Yankees having that fire. I don't think necessarily Joey Gallo is going to help, sneak you into a wild card. I don't think you're winning the division. And you know what? I'm fine with it. I'm happy with it. I do not think the Yankees are making the playoffs this year.
I think, I definitely echo that with the Yankees. I think that the standings in the AL, it's going to stay like that. I think Red Sox, White Sox, Astros are going to be the division winners. Rays and A's are going to be the wild cards. I want to say that the Mets are going to choke the NL East, but I do think that they're going to hold on to that. But I think in the NL Central, Cincinnati can make some noise. I mean, their outfielders, Winker and Castellanos are just so talented. That offense is tough to beat. I think that they've got a really good shot at dethroning the Brewers in the Central. And, I know you're not a big Dodgers guy, Mike, but I just can't bet against them, man. They're too good. I see the Dodgers taking the NL West and, the other 2 teams, Giants, Padres, being the wild cards.
Yeah, I mean, in the AL, I agree with you guys. I don't think the Yankees are going to make it. I think the Jays are actually, they're going to be the team, I think, from the AL. I like the Jays. They're going back to Toronto, which I think playing on like these road, weird schedules, like that must take a toll on them. They're over 500. Vlad Guerrero has been just absolutely outstanding. Maybe they add at the deadline. We didn't talk about them, but if they add at the deadline, I mean, I don't know if George Springer, but he hasn't really played at all. So I just think this team, I think they got more. I just think they have more left in them. And I think if a team's going to do it, I don't know if it's going, but if I was going to make a bold prediction, I think the Jays do it. And I'll stick with my AL prediction from April. And I'm going to go with the White Sox winning it. I know the Red Sox have really came on, and maybe if I don't want to change my prediction because the White Sox have been good, so I'll keep it. But I think the Red Sox would be the team to beat them. I think it actually will be, the Red Sox. I think they'll play in the CS on the AL side. In the NL, I agree with you, Jack. I think the Dodgers are going to win that division. I think the Giants are actually going to beat the Padres, though, in that wild card game. I think there's just something about the Giants. I think they're a little more scrappy. They got really good pitching, and they'll win that. I think the Mets, they'll hold on, and I think the Brewers will hold on. But I think the Mets are going to go to the CS, and they may make noise. I just think Jacob deGrom, if you're going to a 7-game series, he pitches 3 times. If he pitches in the DS, would be 2. When you get those, basically, I don't want to call them free wins, but they're basically free wins. And that's something that I think really means a lot in the playoffs when you can have someone go 7-8 innings. And I don't think they're going to be 6-inning starts. I think they're just going to let Jacob deGrom pitch. And that is going to be the difference. And I really feel like this Mets team has something magical around them. And if they add a Chris Bryant, which I do think they're going to, I think they're going to catch fire in the second half. I think they're going to run away with the NL East, and they're going to make some noise in the playoffs. I don't know if it'll be World Series, but I think it will be, at least into the CS, and they're going to make a deep run. But I do think with all that said, it is time to wrap up the show. Special thanks to our guests, as always, 2021 unanimous All-American and San Francisco Giants draft pick, Matt Mikulski. It was great to talk with him, as well as writer and editor Matt Caputo. If you missed any part of the show, you can check it out. Check out the highlights or the entire program on WFUVsports.org or WFUV Sports YouTube page. The sports director at WFUV is Bobby Chaffardini. As always, thanks to our producer, Alex Wolves, for keeping the lights on. He always does an amazing job. And I'm Andrew Gullotta, telling everyone to have a great rest of your night. I'm joined by Jack Roche and Michael Leegan with the headlines. It was great to talk sports with you guys. One-on-One is a production of WFUV Sports.